And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left and 127. We are here with a few guests tonight. We can talk about the convention, obviously, making my day, making your day. Once again, I remind you, please check out my, you want to get in touch with me, go to my website, Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com, FaderFiles.com. You can sign up for my mailing list. Check out some other YouTube things that I've done, politics and others. See sort of various books I've written, other stuff I've done on the radio. And then you also should check out the Facebook page I have, which is sort of an ongoing political discussion about all the things you hear on the air here. Only people can participate, post videos, have debates. It's called Occupied Territory. Occupied Territory. And so Google Facebook and Occupied Territory. That'll take you there. Okay, so one circus was in town and moved out, and now another circus is coming back to town on Monday. But we have with us our old pal here, Greg Palast, to talk about a new book of his. Hey, Greg.
How you doing, Michael?
All right, how are you?
Getting by.
You're getting by.
In this, well, yeah, we're getting ready for the circus. I put on, the big shoes. I got a glue on the nose, and I'm ready to be a pundit.
Yeah, but if you got the seltzer bottle, they're going to arrest you as a terrorist. So
yeah, but you can have a loaded gun.
All right, so
I don't mess around with the water guns. They're illegal.
Yeah, only real. They forbade water guns down in Tampa, but they allow you could carry a real gun.
Yeah.
That's God bless America. So the new book is called Billionaires and Ballot Bandits.
Yes.
How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps. But before we talk about that, let me just mention that if you're listening to Greg Palast, his previous books are such as Vulture's Picnic, International Oil and Other Predators that he undercover investigates and reveals. And then also Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And there is a film called Why We Occupy. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, because of the billionaires and ballot bandits.
But the film itself?
Yeah. And Why We Occupy is just, it actually goes through what became billionaires and ballot bandits. So they just, the film that just came out this week, and the book's coming out next week, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. But it's like, for example, and I start out with the list of people. When we talk about the 1% and the 99%, these are nice numbers and it's a cute idea, but who are these guys?
Mm-hmm.
So, I talk about this investigation I did of one guy who was a guy stealing from Native Americans, the Osage Indian Reservation. He had trucks that were taking oil out of the Native Reservation, little stripper wells that these people have. They have no money. They just live in mobile homes and make a few bucks a month from stripper wells.
From royalties, right?
Yeah, tiny stuff. So he was stealing oil, siphoning it off. And we followed these trucks. I was working with the FBI. This was years ago. We go back to a loading dock in Oklahoma. And there's this big, tall guy. He's telling the truckers for more overage. That's their word for theft. He wanted more. The guy calling for more theft from the reservation was Charles Koch himself.
So wait a minute. So this is. I want to try to proceed in some sort of semblance of a linear order.
This is why we occupy.
Oh yeah, okay.
This is why, and this is one of the Koch is one of the billionaires from Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. This is where they meet. And so when I said there's Charles Koch, but here's the,
But what? But
if
if
have a punchline.
Yeah.
Here's the punchline. The punchline is this. You ready for a punch? And to make a fist. Is that Koch? We had Koch. Not Koch. We had one of his executives wired.
Uh-huh.
And he asked Koch, "Why are you doing this?" Because Koch at that time, this is back in the 80s. Even then, Koch was already a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
So why is he standing, in the middle of Oklahoma, telling guys to steal $30 a week from an Indian family? And he said, and this is a quote: "I want my fair share, and that's all of it."
Oh man!
I want my fair share, and that's all.
That's like something from a 1930s depression film. The bad guy.
It's like you don't really expect people to actually. You don't expect these bad guys to actually talk like that, but they really do.
Well, so if you work with the FBI in this, and the FBI has evidence that he was skimming the oil, that is a crime. So why didn't he get indicted and arrested?
Well, then for that you have to read Billionaires and Ballot Bandits.
Okay, now mentioning Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, which just came out with it, I just want to mention that it's got an introduction by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it's got great comics in it by Ted Rall, who's been on the show here many times. And it's a
comic book, 50 pages.
It's great, and it really works too. It works with the book, and so there it is: Billionaires and Ballot Bandits: How to Steal the Election in 9 Easy Steps, and it's also very, very well done. Small little book, but a big little book at the same time. So, how to even approach this? But basically, when you say there's two basic themes of this book, I guess. One is it's about the almost 6 million votes that are going or can be that might be stolen in November. Almost 6 million, and you can explain how and what and who's doing it. And the second whole thing, which is connected to that, obviously, is going into the histories of the billionaire, what you call PAC men, who have purchased and will purchase more of Congress and the White House through all their money. I mean, that's essentially the spine of the book, right?
Yeah, I mean, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits are about billionaires and ballot bandits. And what I'm trying to do is connect these, because they are connected. I'm trying to connect vote theft, wholesale vote theft by the millions, and connect that to the guys who are funding it. Not only how they got their money to pay for a president, but why they're doing it, how this money came about. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a victimless billionaire, is what I'm finding out. And then explain how and why they're using this money to fix the election. And Bobby Kennedy actually wrote one of the chapters, but he and I spent a long time investigating. Kennedy is the dean at the law school at Pace University and a civil rights attorney, of course. And he worked with me on a big story for Rolling Stone that we did before on this issue, but on the ballot theft. And I said, well, you got to follow the money. And so it goes back to who's funding it, and that's where we get to Koch. And by the way, there's a chapter in there called Target 67C.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is the FBI's code name for Charles Koch. And because they had the goods on him, and I have you'll see in the book, you'll see the indictment on felony criminal charges of Koch for theft from an Indian reservation and federal property.
Okay, I see that. I'm looking at it right now. And then after an indictment usually comes an arrest. What happened?
Yeah, you should. I mean, since they have videotape and they have audio tape, you'd think that you'd get some. They'd say spread him, and he'd be in the hoosegow. Yeah. Instead of said it at the Republican National Convention. The answer is that when you're that rich, you basically can buy the system. What he did was he virtually rented Senator Don Nickles of Oklahoma, and prosecutors served at the pleasure of a U.S. senator, their U.S. senator, and so Nickles was no longer pleased with the prosecutor. So the prosecutor was fired.
Who is that?
You know what? I can't remember the name of the prosecutor.
Is that Iglesias?
Remember Nancy Jones was the assistant who actually drafted the indictment, and she was bounced. The grand jury was dissolved without being allowed to see evidence because they'd actually gone so far as they'd impaneled the grand jury to indict Koch, and they were dismissed without being allowed to see the evidence, and it went poof, and that's how these guys operate. But now they had to figure out to do that. The Koch brothers had to the amount of money that they had to move illegally, and I use that advisedly. I used to be a government investigator, obviously, and Kennedy is a pretty serious cat when it comes to these things. We don't just use words like illegal for nothing. They made all these illegal payments through Koch Industries, which was illegal because Koch Industries is a corporation.
A person, you mean?
Well, no, not at the time. A corporation.
Oh, right. That was before they were people.
They were kind of legal Frankensteins, which were not allowed to, purchase elections.
This is before they became real boys, like in Pinocchio, right?
Yeah. So right, exactly. Before the noses grew.
Okay.
And so what happened is that the Koch brothers funded. They had a little organization which was being used by a couple of other billionaires as a front for moving money, called Citizens United. And then they hired them the most expensive lawyer in America, Ted Olson, to go before the Supreme Court, which is the most expensive Supreme Court ever purchased, and basically made their illegal activity legal. They made their corporate donations via Koch Industries. They'd used a cutout, by the way, which I love the name of it. They used which they called Triad. In other words, Koch Industries gave money to Triad, which gave money to front groups, which were funding candidates illegally. Triad, of course, is the name of the money laundering gangs in China. And that's the Koch operations. When they're being nice, they use names like Triad, Tarantula.
Well, Robert Kennedy said he has no hesitation in calling these people traitors, literally traitors to the country, right? To democracy, basically.
Yeah,
right?
He used the term traitors, and he says, we're worried that we use English like traitors, felons, criminals.
Yeah.
But, he's pretty adamant that this is, that's what it is, that you have to call it, because when you undermine the basics of justice, when you purchase the vote, this is at its core, undermining everything that we're supposed to be in America. So he uses the word treason. To me, it's just, not that, to me, it's just a crime. And making the crime legal doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't make it less of a crime. When you buy the politicians who then appoint your own Supreme Court for you, it's still, to me, a crime. You've just been able to, as Capone it used to try to buy judges and influence judges. These guys appoint them. That's no joke. And when I say they appoint them, they literally give the list to their candidates, judges, and they have these meetings on cruise ships where they kind of indoctrinate the judges before they start their term on the bench. They leave no dollar unturned. So it's a story of billionaires like the Kochs. I want my fair share, and that's all of it, Kochs. And then some of the lesser-known billionaires who were behind the political chowdown.
Well, like, for instance, like Paul Singer, who you've mentioned before, like in Vultures, and then who was this man in Texas? What's his name?
Oh, Iceman Simmons. And by the way, I didn't call Paul the Vulture Singer the Vulture, and I didn't give Iceman Simmons his name, Iceman. Their bankers who love them give them these names, because these are the most vicious financiers, I was going to say on the planet, but probably, as opposed to, say, maybe not Russian oligarchs, but in the U.S., they're the most vicious guys out there. And these are the guys who, by the way, stayed away from John McCain.
Why? Why did they stay away from John McCain?
Well, lots of things. The McCain-Feingold law to try to limit and expose money behind political campaigns, et cetera. And Obama was playing ball with the banks. But these guys don't want to play ball with the banks anymore, who are still, by the way, backing Obama, as you'll see in Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. It's like Obama has his billionaires, but like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank. But
so he's still got the bankers on his side not as much as he had in 2008, though, right?
They're kind of they're kind of going along with him for one reason, that they are as scared of the Vulture and the Iceman and the Kochs as we should be.
So these are people that you're writing about in this book that scare investment bankers.
Oh, yeah. There's no question. In fact, Paul the Vulture Singer, for those who don't know him, he was a star in my book, Vulture's Picnic. And at that time, I've been hunting him down, stakeouts, everything else since 2007. I just came back from the Congo where I was following, where he was ripping off. He was basically using, it sounds ridiculous. It's so bad it sounds like a cartoon.
I know it does when you read it.
Literally taking the money meant for ending the cholera epidemic in the Congo, and he, through a flim-flam, basically scooped up that money. And I traced that from Sarajevo and Bosnia into the Congo, etc. But these are so these are guys who scare the bankers, because the Obama administration, Obama and Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, used an unusually, rarely used provision of the U.S. Constitution to go into a federal court and say that the activities of the Vulture were a threat to the entire world financial system. And I know they did that at the behest of the big banks, who are scared that these guys are really, they're the kind of financial terrorists in a helicopter pulling the pin out of the grenade. These are berserkers, you have to understand, and they are the absolute big money behind Romney. Restore Our Future, which is the Romney Super PAC, was put together by Paul the Vulture Singer. And
people should understand. I mean, you could explain it better than I can. But a guy like Singer, what he does, one of the things he does to make his money is he buys up national debt. In other words, a country like Greece or some other country will get into debt, and he buys it up cheap. And then when they can't pay, he demands almost like something out of the Merchant of Venice. He wants everything that if the UN gives them money, if the Monetary Fund gives them money to save their lives, he wants that money to pay back what he says he's owed, right?
Yeah, well, even more, he demands, I've never seen Singer demand less than $50 for every one that he's paid, that he has put up. So you're talking a kind of loan sharking business. Now, this is now illegal in most. I was able to, by the way, stop his buddies when I went to the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, used to be called Zaire. We were able to get $80 million saved that was supposed to go for a cholera epidemic by exposing this in England and getting all the nations of Europe to agree that this activity was illegal.
So he wanted money. He wanted this money because he said he was owed it, and he didn't care whether God knows how many people would just perish from this.
Well,
right?
The thing is, when we talk about owed, you have to understand. For example, in this one case dealing with the vultures, the vulture gang, the Congo owed money to Bosnia while both nations were in the midst of civil war. Both nations lost 10% of their population in civil war. Millions of people, millions. Congo, as it recovered, it has cobalt and was willing to pay off Bosnia all the money Bosnia was owed, and in return, Bosnia would build power towers for the Congo. It's a really nice story in which two poor countries would get together and help each other out. They would trade cobalt for power towers. Bosnia, which is in a depression, would build things. Turns out that these vultures moved in, paid a $3 million bribe to the Prime Minister of Bosnia, who, out the back door, slipped them the right to collect this money, killed the deal between the Congo and Bosnia. So the entire Bosnian economy imploded because they lost their big plant that was going to work for the Congo. The Congolese economy lost all their cobalt and their money, and which was supposed to be designated for the cholera epidemic, and it's like totally evil. So in other words, these guys use money and inside information bribery. I've not yet run into a case in which bribery or the use of inside information, political muscle, sometimes physical threats have not been used. You can't, Mike, just go out and say, you know what I think I'll do? I think I'm going to go invest in in money that the Congo owes Bosnia. That's not how it works. Someone has to be paid. Someone has to be muscled. And the police, the federal police in Bosnia, have put out an arrest warrant for their former prime minister. But so these are in the rest of the world. This activity is considered these are considered criminals.
Except
Here,
for
like Paul the Vulture Singer is a job creator.
I noticed that there was something, I don't know where I saw this, but it was something online I saw today that MSNBC's coverage, the media, the NBC, the networks decided only an hour a night because Teenage Mom was a more interesting show or whatever it was, But when Romney was coming on, pretending he was like at the State of the Union, shaking everybody's hand.
Right.
At one point, they were showing him doing that, and they lifted the camera to I don't know, did they have a director there, to get another camera shot of a couple of women cheering in the stands or whatever. And they missed the fact that Romney shook hands with one of the Koch brothers right on camera.
Yeah, David Koch.
Yeah.
Yes. They flipped the camera. They moved away. They knew that a shot of Romney hugging his landlord. Romney's only worth $250 million.
Are you saying? So wait a minute. You're saying that MSNBC deliberately moved the camera?
The networks, they don't move the camera. There is a pool camera, which is controlled by the Romney people. If you saw that, just so you know how it technically works, because I'm a TV network guy, right? I work for those who don't know Greg Dallas, I actually have a day job. I work for BBC Television.
Right, BBC TV.
There is a camera on tracks which is moving backwards to catch this grand personal moment. It's a huge beta cam, and it's on tracks, and it's controlled by the Secret Service. Remember that, because anyone that close has to have clearance. So it's the Romney campaign and Secret Service. Everyone has to take that feed. You don't have a choice.
Oh,
the networks aren't choosing.
That's interesting.
Coming through that pool camera, which they control. And obviously, I'm trying to remember his name. The guy who's literally, they have a director just like any television show, who knew that a picture of the two wallets hugging each other would be devastating in certain circles for those who know.
What is
flip the camera?
Now, so this is part of what Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps is all about. But what is the connection between, what are the connections between the Koch brothers, who are about as bad as it gets, and Romney? What is the connection there?
They don't like him.
They don't like Romney.
No, and they're not Republicans. David Koch ran against Ronald Reagan, saying Reagan was too left wing. Excuse me.
Too left wing.
Yeah, he thought Reagan was a socialist, a secret socialist.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't like Republicans, but they do like their money. And the only thing that a billionaire wants more than their billions is another billion. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Koch brothers, they have a whole laundry list. And I told you about one. They have to maintain their because their stuff is always on the edge. They have to maintain immunity for their activities. They not only had the Indian theft indictments, but they had 315 criminal charges filed against them for criminal environmental activities, criminal dumping, knowingly dumping poisons into waterways in the U.S.
Now, who filed that against them? The Justice Department?
Now that was under Clinton, so they have to deal with that stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
they have to get them maintain that immunity and impunity. But in their case now, one of the things that incenses them enormously with Obama. And again, Obama is not necessarily my cup of tea, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not partisan. You'll see his billionaires in here too.
Okay.
But there is a difference, and they are completely fixated with the XL pipeline right now, the Koch brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing I've been able to do as an investigative reporter is that everyone's been looking for the Koch connection, but as I say, at the wrong end of the pipe. The Koch brothers do not own the oil in Canada, the tar sands oil that will be slashing down through the United States to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't own the pipeline. So people keep saying, why are they so fixated with the pipeline? The answer is they are the recipients of the oil. If you're wondering, first of all, no one seems to question why the heck are we bringing oil to Texas from Canada. I mean, bringing oil to Texas is, coals to Newcastle type of thing. And the answer is the Koch brothers have a series of refineries that they just bought along the Gulf Coast. These are money-losing refineries because they were buying oil from Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Oh, you can't rely on him.
No, and you can rely on him for one thing, is that he gets the best price he can.
Mm-hmm.
He charges OPEC price, which is, now these refineries can only crack ultra-heavy oil, which comes from Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
So what they want to do is replace it with a much cheaper source, and that would be the Canadian tar sands, which is heavily subsidized and way below, about at least $7 a barrel below the OPEC.
Oh, so all their refineries are useless unless they get this Canadian tar sand oil.
Yeah,
right.
they're running at high cost and high risk. If they get the pipeline, which is dedicated to providing them the cheap stuff,
Mm-hmm.
then they make billions. So they are basically turning a multi-billion-dollar loser into a multi-billion-dollar winner if they get their pipeline. That's what it's all about. And of course, Obama is he hasn't come out against it, but he has temporarily blocked the pipeline.
Well, but part of it apparently is being built somewhere. I read the other day.
Yes.
It's not all blocked. Yeah.
Well, yes. What's happened is, though, they're bringing in. Part of the pipeline has been built, but it's not for that heavy crude that comes out of Canada. So it hasn't connected to the big tar sands that the Koch brothers want. So this filthy, awful gunk.
Which is going to go, maybe you could explain exactly where it's going to go across and what it might affect.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that we're talking about a pipeline that's going to run all the way across the United States, and to run it through the Plain States, cheap, and make it a cheap length, a quick length, we'd have to run it across the Aglaela aquifer, which is the gigantic former ocean, which is now a freshwater ocean that's underneath the Plain States.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pollute that, I mean, you just created a massive desert in the middle of America. And having been involved in the Exxon Valdez, being an investigator in the Exxon Valdez breakup, I can tell you it's nasty stuff. So obviously it's kind of a berserker idea. It's a filthy idea, even doing, cooking, pulling up and cooking the tar sands. And that's literally what it is. They have scoops that just pull up square miles of the land, melt it in big giant monster kilns until they render out oil. It's not oil drilling; it's oil mining and smelting, and then they stick it in this pipe and bring it all the way across the United States, just so the Koch brothers can then refine it.
But
and ship it out. By the way, it's shipped out as gasoline, as their ultimate product, which is sent into the Caribbean. It's not for U.S. consumption. It's number one.
So, in other words, when all these Republicans get up there and talk about, we'll be energy, like we won't have to rely on foreign oil, blah blah blah. But which also you point out in the book that you reminded Romney that basically Canada is not a suburb of Seattle; it's actually a foreign country.
Yeah, I know when you talk about
foreign oil.
Oil. If we have the XL pipeline, it's as if Canada.
Yeah.
I suppose some people really do feel.
So meanwhile,
feel that they're part of. They're the 51st state, but I think a lot of Canadians resent that.
Well, so these guys are getting up there all the time. They're talking about this is one of their biggest things, like Obama, the price of oil, blah 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 blah. We can't rely on foreign oil. We're going to be foreign oil free, and all of this oil they're talking about that's come down through the XL pipeline is basically going to be turned into gasoline, which is going to be shipped out of the United States. So there's nothing that we're going to get out of this except the possible end of the Middle West and the Southwest from pollution. But then they'll say, what about the 60,000 jobs on the pipeline? Well, we've gone over that before here. It's about 6,000 temporary jobs, I think, at the most.
It's a pipe, but it's pipelines. Unfortunately, they don't maintain workers on pipelines. That's one of the dangers of these long pipelines, as we've seen in Alaska, where it's corroding and breaking. I've been along those pipelines, and you go for miles and miles and miles and miles. There's no one watching them. It's not like like someone's keeping their eye on this stuff. They can't. It would cost them a fortune to have people and watching stations and inspections all the way up and down the line. And we've been through in my story before that we're relying on something called they use robots instead of people.
Right, little R2D2s, right?
Yeah, this what we call the pigs. And from my other book, so you got to read all of them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Vulture's Picnic. I have a chapter called "Pig in the Pipeline." We know that the pigs, these robot pigs, that they fiddle with their software so that it doesn't signal us when there's the problems that there are. Because every time it signals a problem, of course, you got to replace pipe. That's gazillions of dollars. It's just cheaper to let the damn things leak.
Well,
I've been up in Alaska. You just see that crap all over the place. But who cares? It's caribou as far as most Americans are concerned. Caribou and Eskimos. So who cares, right? But I think that people in the lower 48 will start caring when. Unfortunately, what we'll mostly see is a rise in that other commodity. Forget the price of gasoline, the rise in the price of water. Mm-hmm. What we're going to see as a result.
Well, yeah, if they pollute the water, then any water.
I don't think people ever think about that. I mean, right now our water is like dirt cheap because we are sitting on top of these old oceans. Mm-hmm. You get rid of your ocean of water, and now you've got yourself a very expensive problem to turn on that tap.
Okay, So part of this book is then, main important part of the book, you say follow the money and follow these guys who basically bribe officials, get people fired, get people replaced, quash investigations. So part of the book here, the root part of the book is who these people are, where they got their money, how they bribe people. But the other part of the book is, because we're going to have to take a break here and I want to come back afterwards, is how you lay out in great detail how these people illegally managed to squash or could manage to squash almost 6 million votes. How they could really truly steal the election, and it has to do, and basically it has to do with suppression of votes, voter ID, all these voter ID things. Which
we're going to get to. We'll take the break on it, but we did some really interesting. Undercover investigation, of course, got inside the computer files of the Republican National Committee. I don't do hacking, so it was...
Somebody sent you that, right?
Someone, and that was fun because, I'll give you the hint on that. Someone within the George Bush campaign, actually, Karl Rove's office, sent a bunch of emails with stone-cold evidence of illegal manipulation of the vote.
Right.
to their buddies, the state chairman of the Republican Party, but instead of putting GeorgeWBush.com, a couple of the addresses had .org, GeorgeWBush.org, which is a joke site owned by my friend John Wooden, and he said, "Holy crap, this is."
I remember when that happened. Yeah.
You know, can you take a look at these? They were kind of mysterious. We had to decode them, of course, but it didn't take very long. I mean, because they never expected, of course, this stuff would become public. And,
well, in this book, Rove turns out to be one of the arch villains of all time. I mean, basically, he is really
one of the most brilliant men. But I will say one thing. I want to thank Carl for one thing. He was the first guy to sign up to my Twitter account. He follows me avidly, and I know from, by the way, his own files, which were subpoenaed by the Justice Department. They are very. They've bought all my books. They're very careful followers of Greg Palast. So I don't want to lose all my friends in the Rove organization or Carl because they do support my work.
There's no way that you
tracking me.
Well, there's no way you could lose them. I mean, it's the same principle as I have people who hate me but make sure they listen to me every week for 35 years. It's the same. They got to listen to you. They have to find out what you're doing. You know.
I know. It's
well, that's the
funny.
but not to be too psychological, but that's the other side of them. Somewhere in their diseased brains, there's a horrible sense that they're little boys who have just done something very wrong. So they have to make sure that they're tracking the people who are trying to get them. But why get into that? We're going to take a break here. We are talking with Greg Palast, journalist, broadcaster, BBC reporter, filmmaker, first man to climb Mount Everest, SEAL team commander, et cetera, et cetera. And a new book is yeah. Somebody said the SEALs were leaking the other day. Somebody wrote that book about some SEAL wrote a book. He's trying to submarine Obama, right? Is that right? Anyhow, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits is the new book. Introduction by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which is a very good introduction, and comics by our good friend Ted Rall, who basically wants to overthrow the current government of the United States. But that's another subject. We're going to take a break and come back. Okay, you heard what the Sirius announcer man said. This is Sirius XM Left 127. Talking to Greg Palast, P-A-L-A-S-T. New book is Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps. So basically the second major part of this book is, aside from where all these pigs got their money and how they bribe people and choose legislators and buy the White House and everything else, is exactly how, and here's where Karl Rove is really the main villain in all this, how they steal votes. And maybe you can go over some of the major ways that they already have done it and how they want to do it. Like, for instance, all this voter ID stuff, which encouragingly I notice that Obama's Justice Department is actually scoring some victories in some really serious states like Texas, Ohio, Florida, you know.
Well, yeah, they've woken up on this, and it took them 3 years to realize that this is how they could lose the election.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very nervous about actually acting on it. But I try to bring up the creepier stuff. ID is one, which people finally gotten figured out. You will see the story, that's a chapter called Nuns on the Run.
Mm-hmm.
We had a dozen nuns, or 10 nuns show up in Indiana, where they've been elderly nuns, where they've been voting for decades. And they were bounced out because they didn't have the proper, they didn't have driver's license. One was 98 years old, so it was kind of...
So they voted in, like, God knows how many elections, and one person drove them there, and the rest of them don't have driver's license because what do they need them for, in their lives, and they didn't have them. And they got turned away to vote because of this ID law, which is spread over something like 30-odd states now, right?
Yeah, and now, interestingly, Justice Scalia, who approved the Indiana law, because it did go to the Supreme Court, and that one did pass through the Supreme Court. It was approved because Scalia said, well, because when the lawyer said, it's an average of 17 miles to the average county seat where you can get alternative ID.
You have to drive. It's a 17-mile, and it's driving, right?
Right, and so they said, well, it's 17 miles, for rich people and poor people, black people and white people. Well, I actually investigated this, and believe it or not, I know that Scalia actually has a black BMW. He's got a Beamer. So 17 miles an hour in a new black Beamer, maybe whether you have a black Beamer or a white Beamer, it doesn't make any difference. But for your average person, a poor person who doesn't have a car by definition without the license, it's a full day, it's a day of work off each way. So people they know who's getting knocked out from these votes. from the voter rolls, and the Brennan Center said about 5 million people will be affected. And understand what that means. Karl Rove has written that 1/4% decline in the black vote, for example, in Carolina, will swing the election.
And he wasn't doing an analysis. He was actually giving advice to people how. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So then, now, of course, doing the ID, that's manipulating law. But the problem are the clearly illegal things like voter caging. That's what we caught. When I got my hands on those emails from Rove's office. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the guy who was in that office, too, the assistant to the guy sending out the emails, or whose name they were sent out under, I emphasize that for a reason. But is a guy named Matt Rhodes in that office. He is now the campaign chairman or the campaign manager for Mitt Romney. So what Rove's office did is they sent letters to soldiers, black soldiers, who had been shipped off overseas.
When you say Rove's office where? In what organization?
It was the Republican National Committee, their so-called research operation and their opposition research operation, so which is under Rove's control.
And Rhodes, who was involved in this voter caging thing, which is thoroughly illegal, is now the campaign manager for
Mitt Romney. Okay. Now, what they do is they sent letters to soldiers who've been shipped off overseas, black ones, so they knew which way they were going to vote. Mm-hmm. And and they said, do not forward. So when the letters hit their homes in Florida and came back to the Republican National Committee, which they call that caging. When the letters were caged, they then used those letters to challenge the soldiers' votes. And I talked to one
because nobody was there to receive the letter, or is that
right? Because it said these are false. Oh, these are false addresses.
And they knew these people were overseas. How do they know they're black?
Oh, BLA is next to their name.
Get out! Come on, really?
BLA.
Does it say JEW too, or LES or anything?
It does say WHIBLA and HISP.
No kidding, really?
Yeah.
Holy
AI
shit! Unbelievable.
And so all these voter databases are racially, in most states, are especially in the Old South, are racially tagged. By the way, by federal law. That was the idea, was to protect voters by having their race on it, so that the feds could see if there was hanky-panky. In fact, with the rise of databases, become the means to target these voters. So, for example, they did this caging business where they knew that the people were away. They also targeted black colleges. I want to thank David Brancaccio of PBS for working with me on that, who found that they were targeting black colleges where the students were away for the summer. Again, do not forward letters, and they would say, these voters are fraudulent. They would mail in an absentee ballot. For example, one soldier said, well, I was able to mail in my ballot. I said, sure you were. Do you know if it was counted? No. I said, well, it wasn't. You were on the challenge list. Because you don't even know you've lost your vote most of the time, unless you go in and they say, oh, well, wait, you're marked as having a false address.
So in other words, all right, so the letter goes to somebody, they're not there, and the people who sent it knew they weren't there, and then it
gets returned.
They send in a challenge to the vote, and then it goes on a list of challenge. So when the people actually send in a ballot, it gets not counted, right?
That's right. And in fact, I want to warn people, don't go postal. At the end of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, we have something called 7 Ways to Beat the Ballot Bandits, or you can even just download it if you don't want to get the book, at ballotbandits.org. One of the things is don't go postal. If you don't have to mail in your vote, don't do it, because about 2 million out of the 26 million votes that will be cast absentee, at least 2 million are going to be thrown in the garbage for all kinds of cockamamie reasons. Mainly that they don't like who you're voting for, and they know who you're voting for because they know these lists. These guys are very sophisticated, and they'll say, okay, your signature's changed, suspicious signature. They didn't like the weight of the envelope, postage due. You ask for an absentee ballot, they don't send it to you on time.
But there are hundreds of thousands of people, students and soldiers particularly, who have to use absentee ballots.
That's right.
So what? They're screwed. That's it.
Yeah. But what you need to do is protect yourself by making sure, point number 2 after don't go postal is register and re-register. If you think you're registered, don't believe it. 22 million people were purged off the voter rolls in the past 2 years. 22 million. My own assistant, despite helping me on the book, shows up at the voting polls, And they said, can't vote. He said, why? He says, you're an inactive voter. He says, what do you mean? I've just been voting in every election. He says, yeah, but you're down as inactive. You can't vote. He says, well, I'm active right now. I'm registered. Sorry.
Huh.
There you go.
So you got to try. So you got to try early to find out whether you're
one. You got to vote early. Okay, don't go postal. Vote early.
Okay.
Every state has early voting. In fact, the Republicans try to stop early voting in Ohio, and a judge overturned that. And third, register and re-register. Check with your Secretary of State online or online with your local county clerk to see if you're really registered. These guys are purging like mad.
So voter. So all right. So the challenge is there. But is this voter caging illegal according to federal and state law?
Okay. There's two ways it's illegal. One, the Republicans signed a consent decree because they got caught like 2 decades ago doing it, and they promised never, ever, ever promised, cross their heart, hope to die, that they would never do it again, and there they were doing it again.
No kidding.
And
what a shock.
The second thing is that under the Voting Rights Act, because they targeted black and Jewish voters, they're going after the elderly of Zion, right? They're going after Jewish voters and black voters. That's illegal because of you can't not profile and target your challenges religiously or racially.
Let me ask the naive question again, because I like to ask naive questions. So people know that they're doing this. There's evidence that they've done something which is clearly illegal. So basically, they've all been arrested and put in jail, right?
Yeah.
The answer?
Dreams, in a better world. So what happened was that after we got this information, the illegality.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're, I had a U.S. federal prosecutor who's a Republican, David Iglesias, tell me that yes, they were doing this. He didn't so much try to prevent it as not participate, because remember, this is also being done in coordination in the Bush administration with the Justice Department that they controlled. So the guys that are supposed to arrest the evildoers are actually in on the scheme. So the guy that was kind of the point man on this, a guy named Tim Griffin, who was Karl Rove's little dog's body, as we'd say in England, his little dog's body. Griffin, he was, if you remember, 8 prosecutors were fired.
Right.
He was behind that with Rove, and he had himself appointed a federal prosecutor. So, in other words, the guy involved in the caging was the U.S. federal prosecutor. When I released this information on BBC television, God forbid it should be done on U.S. TV, when I released it on BBC television, by the next morning, Griffin had resigned as federal prosecutor in tears, blaming that British reporter, meaning Greg Palast. I am a British reporter. I report from Britain, but I'm Americano, right? But anyway, he's crying and in tears. But then he got saved. He's not in prison. He's in Congress because the Koch brothers gave him $167,000 to run for Congress, which is probably
from where? Where did he run from?
He's Little Rock, Arkansas.
All right. So he ran for Congress and he got elected?
Yeah, he did, with all that massive money.
Okay.
I've never seen that much money by a single source of donation in a congressional campaign ever. And so it was astonishing. So the Koch brothers basically took this kind of wiped out, tainted guy that resigned in disgrace and put him in Congress. David Iglesias, who was a Republican prosecutor, who said this activity is illegal. They wanted me to participate in a vote-fixing scheme. I wouldn't do it, and they fired him. And, he was one of the few, though, he stood up and screamed and hollered about it in the end, because we talked about it. I was one of the only people that figured out, because he talked to me. I figured out right away, this is about the vote stuff.
So this guy Griffin, who's basically a criminal and should be in jail, was one of the major kickoff people at the Republican convention recently, right?
He was the first. He represented the... so they had him they had Griffin represent the entire Republican congressional delegation, speak for the delegation at the convention. Now, why would they take a freshman from, an unswing state?
Right.
The idea was a signal to everyone. To the Kochs, we're taking care of your boy. He's also the nexus between the Kochs and Karl Rove's operation, which is called Crossroads. Crossroads, they're not done with this stuff. Crossroads has created a database called Data Trust, and the Koch brothers have a database called Themis. Rove assured Singer the Vulture and other people. They're all connected up, as you can see. That don't worry, we're working together. We're not in competition, because there was some feeling that maybe they're going to compete. If they put these two databases together, you're going to see massive multi-million vote caging going on. And we already see the indication. They've already done it, and that caging, by the way, affected hundreds of thousands of voters. This is not a minor business.
Well, you point out in the book that basically what happened in Ohio, particularly, and a couple of other places, changed the whole election in 2004. Basically, they stole that election, right?
Yes, they definitely stole that election. And I don't know if you remember when there was a kid in Florida, college student, who told John Kerry, why did you give up on the election? And he got tased. Remember, "Don't tase me, bro"?
Oh, yeah.
That was my book. He was holding my book, Armed Madhouse, which had a chapter called Kerry Won.
Well, you got to put these books out that are somehow able to deflect tasers. I mean,
right. It's the yeah, I know.
I can't. So listen. There's only unfortunately, there's only about 2 or 3 minutes left. So
But I will say, Kerry did say. Because the kid said, "Have you read this? You should read this book." And Kerry, by the way, Senator Kerry said, "I have." And it's the real story of what happened in the election. He never did answer, though, why he then gave up.
Why did Gore give up? Why did they all give up?
Yeah, I mean, I know why Gore gave up, because I had the inside story from inside his campaign. They basically said, "You're not going to win because of the Supreme Court if you do the challenge." Because remember, they came to him with my story in 2000, which you have in the book, which is that Katherine Harris knocks off tens of thousands of black voters, calls them felons. Their only crime is voting while black. And so obviously that accounted for the 500 vote shift easily between Gore and Bush. Gore got that information while the Supreme Court had not yet met, hadn't yet argued. And some of the people said, "Let's use this stuff from England," because it was writing for the Guardian. And the other huge fight in there. Gore said, "We hate that guy, me. Gore hates me." So he didn't like relying on me. But they basically said, he's worth $200 million now, Al Gore. $200 million.
$200 million?
$200 million.
Where did he get $200 million from?
He owns Current TV. He's got all kinds of business connections. Basically, they took care of him. And, just...
Whoa. So you're saying Gore gave in. He took a dive in the boxing match there, and they promised him something, and he got something afterwards.
I think he thought he might come back and run again or whatever, but, they basically said, if you challenge...
You're going to lose.
You're toast. You're going to lose, and then you're toast.
And you don't get money.
No one will touch you, and you won't be on any corporate boards, and no financiers. Your businesses are dead. You are basically persona non grata.
Okay, so listen, we only got like a minute and a half. 2 last questions, real quick. And you mentioned this, and you go into some detail in your book here. The press is responsible for the fact that people are ignorant in this country and don't know any of this, right?
Yeah, it's horrible. I call it a chapter called in Billionaires About That. It's called Depressed.
Okay.
I mean, I am doing these reports at the top of the nightly news in England on BBC. It's not a small network. I do it for The Guardian, which is the most influential English-language paper in the world, and I do that on the front page. And everyone else in the world knows all the details of how elections are stolen in America. Where is it here? It's a subject. It's a prohibited subject.
And it's prohibited because, well, clearly, obviously, major companies like GE and other companies like this who are hooked into these people own the networks. But then you get something like NPR, with their vanilla pudding heads. They would never take the chance and offend you.
Where do they get their money? They're even worse. And I can tell you, David Brancaccio, who did a whole story based on my stuff and put me on the air, confirmed my report. So did the Civil Rights Commission. Basically, he said that really hurt him with the network, massively with PBS. Phil Donahue put me on, and he said it was devastating, the come down. And he said, and it's not because, it's wacky stuff, because it's obviously the main
it's all real,
the rest of the world, and no one's questioned this stuff, but there's certain prohibited topics, and especially like what I call petroleum broadcast system, because they are so much controlled by their reliance on the corporate...
PBS is obviously, you watch the PBS news coverage, you have David Brooks and Judy Woodruff, and if they could have crawled down and kissed Romney and Ryan's ass on TV, they would have done it. That's it. We're just about at the end of the program. Everybody should get this book. It's called Billionaires and Ballot Bandits: How to Steal an Election in 9 Easy Steps by Greg Palast. terrific, large number of comic illustrations by Ted Rall and an introduction by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You got about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I would go to ballotbandits.org, ballotbandits.org. You got to download a lot of this stuff for free because we want to get it out. And,
Okay.
And so it's basically a gigantic investigative comic book story. And have some fun with it. But go to ballotbandits.org and download as much as you can for free, especially the 7 ways.
Steal this book.
Bandits. Right.
Steal this book. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Watch out for yourself.
And I'll watch out for my ballot. Bye.
Okay, bye. All right, that's it for this hour. At 6 p.m., we're going to talk about a guy who went undercover at a place, one of the major nutty places, Republican fringe places, that is actually teaching people across the country how to watch out for fraudulent voters, presumably also rats and demons in your closet. But he went undercover and checked into these people. So we'll be talking to him afterwards, after the 6 o'clock news, and we'll see you then. And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left 127, and we are back again after having talked to Greg Palast. You really should get this book. It's called Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, and it's about the people in this country who own and run the Republican Party and basically own and run the country, and they are making sure that the legislators and the president, that would be Romney, their president, and the Supreme Court does exactly what they want them to do. And part of this, and how they get this, is by suppressing the vote and stealing the vote. And now we're going to talk to somebody who did a little undercover work, an investigation in one of the particular organizations that is deeply involved in, first of all, imagining and telling other people that there are voter fraud people everywhere, infesting everything, and how they're trying to suppress it. It's Stephen Rosenfeld, and he's with us now. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
So this is a. Have you seen his book yet? It's really something. Billionaires and Ballot Bandits by Greg Palast.
No, I haven't seen Palast's book. Actually, he's written about the elections for quite some time. And but honestly, I haven't seen it, which I guess your guests are not supposed to say. But
yeah, it doesn't come out for 2 weeks. So
that's what I have to confess.
Yeah.
I've been reading the right-wingers' books instead.
Important to do that, though. So, because especially since you did this astounding journey into the dark world there. Stephen Rosenfeld is a senior fellow at alternate.org, and he covers democracy issues. He's a longtime print and broadcast journalist and has reported for National Public Radio, Monitor Radio, Marketplace, Alternate, TomPaine.com, and many newspapers. And he has written and co-authored 3 books on voting rights since 2004, including Count My Vote, which is by Alternate Books from 2008. So what was it? First of all, we do know, we've established the fact that somehow a lot of Republicans have dreamed up, it has occurred to them, or God has come to them in a dream or something and told them that there are hundreds of thousands of evil people trying to vote fraudulently across the country, and they have to be ferreted out, and they have to be suppressed and dealt with. And so all these laws are passed, and there are organizations devoted to this kind of thing. These people may be the tools of people who are very rich and know what they're doing, but still they are believers, and they know what they do this. And the major author here is of the book, a place called True the Vote, is John Fund, F-U-N-D. And maybe you can tell me, it's sort of
there's sort of a galaxy of players and organizations that have kind of emerged. Well, they kind of emerged after Ohio in 2004, and then they sort of infected the Bush Justice Department. And some of the folks there, and you might remember that there was a scandal where 7 or 9, I forget, U.S. attorneys were fired because of failing to pursue voter fraud prosecutions.
Right. And
then that kind of went onto the surface a little bit until 2010, when 2009, when the Tea Party sort of began to emerge. And you might remember that there were those town hall meetings around the country where people were trying to talk, the Congress people were trying to talk about what has become Obamacare, and they were disrupted. And there was all kinds of, really kind of aggressive confrontations. And these folks kind of grew into, some parts of what has been called the Tea Party.
Mm-hmm.
And what's been common through all of this is, there's been a long time established strategy, and it's not just in our era, in the last 10 years or so, it's really been the Republicans. When before the Civil Rights Movement, it was the old Southern Democrats,
mm-hmm.
and also the old 19th, early 20th century, urban inner city machines. And what they've done all along is they've complicated the process of voting so that they can essentially, maintain their power. So what you've got today is, 50 years after the major civil rights legislation is passed,
mm-hmm.
you just can't go out there and say, we don't want you voting because we don't like the color of your skin, or you're too new of an immigrant, or you're going to vote for our opponents.
You can't say that until very recently, unless you're a member of the Ohio Secretary of State staff. But go ahead.
Yeah. So the thing is, what's happened is, very shrewdly, they've kind of concocted this, this fake boogeyman of voter fraud. And the thing that's really interesting about this is, it persists because any process where 130 million people participate every 4 years, which is the presidential election,
mm-hmm.
there's bound to be a few mistakes and a few people who sort of try to, just do something sleazy. I mean, just like every day on the highway, somebody tries to do something sleazy.
Right.
So what they've done is they've taken examples of something that's like, that is like, what happens when the U.S. Attorney's Office under Bush tried to investigate voter fraud. They looked nationwide for 4 or 5 years, and all they could find was something like 36 cases that they could actually prosecute out of 130 million people voting.
Which, in a reasonable or decent or not otherwise motivated group of people, would cause them to drop that pursuit. Right,
and that's why they fired those attorneys, because they said, hey, we got a little more important stuff to do. There's like a Mexican drug war going on down in Southern California and all that sort of. But the reason I mention this, and I emphasize this as a place to start, is it's really, really important for listeners to understand, if you can't say there's no such thing as voter fraud, just like you can't say there's no such thing as any other dumb, low-level crime.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, and this is the key question, what is the scale? And what then is the proportionate response? And where things go off the rails here is that the Republicans have claimed that there's all kinds of voter fraud and that it's widely rampant, which it's not, and therefore you need sweeping solutions like statewide restrictions on different aspects of the voting process.
Well, it seems to me that just by instinct, even if you weren't politically educated or politically fascinated, like maybe you and I are and some other people are, you could pretty easily see that there's some other motivation or some other people behind a thing like that, right?
Well, absolutely. And this is, it's really interesting. You look at, some newspaper editorials since the Republican convention, and there's like a new theme that's coming up. And it's basically that people are the Republicans are getting away with, if it's not outright lies, it's an amazing amount of what you would call half-truths.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost as if they just don't care about the fact-checkers anymore because they keep repeating this stuff and repeating this.
Well, they don't care, but why should they care? The rest of America is brain dead from watching TV and playing with their video games.
Well, I think people are smarter than that. I just don't think they I just think life is complicated. Not everybody gets to become an expert in different areas about voting and things where things have become kind of way too complex, actually.
Well,
what ends up happening?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is that what you've got is you've got this these Republicans, and they're following the cues of some of these organizations like ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. They write model legislation, and the people who are the authors of this legislation, we're talking about a small number of people who are it's like corporate lawyers, except they're in the election fold. They very smartly have figured out that you can target different parts of the election process, parts of voter registration drives, parts of showing up at a polling place for ID. It has nothing to ever do with absentee ballots or voting by mail, which is where they turn out their base, as opposed to Democrats turning out their bases in cities by going to polling places. So they very, very shrewdly have said, the fraud that we are going to exaggerate and are saying the sky is falling and must be dealt with is in all these places where wide, swaths of the Democrats, electoral, coalition.
Black students, some of the elderly, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's happened is in states where there are Republican legislators, and they never, and it's interesting. It's not just states that are presidential swing states.
Mm-hmm.
It's states like Kansas. Now, why would Kansas pass super draconian, voting rights legislation?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of Somalis moving in and Mexicans moving in, and it's not Dorothy's Kansas anymore. And so, we're sort of seeing this play out. It's got an ugly race-based dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the current presidential election, what's happened is we're sort of winning in court. Like this last week, we had 5 decisions that reaffirmed voting rights.
I noticed that. I was pleasantly surprised because usually the Obama Justice Department is very meager and pale when it comes to most things. Like recently, they decided not to go after torturers forever. So finally they woke up, and guess what? It's because their man might not get elected again.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's not just that. I mean, there is this. Whether people like it or not,
Mm-hmm.
the Voting Rights Act is federal law, and what it says is that if you're a racial minority and somehow, after like the redistricting with census, census every 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
or with there certain states that are quote covered states, change laws that will disproportionately impact the ability of minorities
Right.
to participate, they have to be approved by the Justice Department. And certain states like Texas are saying, screw you, we're going to go right to court. And this week the court said, it was amazing, 2 decisions against Texas redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
First against redistricting, which is going to elect 3 more Democratic, probably Latinos, to the House. And they said your voter ID. No way.
And Florida too. And they also they went after this this jerk in Ohio, the Secretary of State, who decided to be so blatant about it. It's outrageous. Where he's people can't vote on weekends, whatever he could figure out. And they told him no, you can't do that. Although Pennsylvania seems to be standing out still.
Well, Pennsylvania is one of these states. The states to worry about are Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Different reasons. And so, but anyway, what's happened is, you sort of asked before, like, what is this group True the Vote, and what did I write about, what did I do? You have these intellectual leaders and these very astute, Republican election lawyers who are coming up with these strategies to create these legislative, and legal hurdles to target different aspects of essentially the voting process.
In the states.
Showing up in polling places, showing up with ID. Now out of the Tea Party's, early stages in 2009, comes this group out of Texas. At first they called themselves the King Street Patriots. They got a lot of money,
mm-hmm.
and they're trying to organize in 35 states. And what they're trying to do is not just challenge voter rolls, but they're trying to also train people to be poll watchers. And what they're looking for is to see how people's IDs are checked. They're looking to see it. If you're handicapped or disabled, and you have the legal right to ask a poll worker for help. They think that if you ask a poll worker for help, the poll worker is likely to tell you how to vote. And they're just going to try to they're not supposed to talk to people at the polls. They're just supposed to observe. But that's not exactly what happened during the Wisconsin recall, where they were active. And it just creates just a big old mess. Mm-hmm. Where, and it slows down the process of voting. And in certain states, like Colorado, they have the help of the Secretary of State, who their research is really shabby. But anything that I don't mean to go on and on here.
Yeah.
But what happens is they're new to looking at elections. So everything they think they see that's wrong or they don't understand, they presume it's a Democratic conspiracy to steal something.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is, this is so transparent. In Wisconsin, they had 13,000 people across the country from their homes, and this is to give them credit for organizing,
mm-hmm.
go through the petition signatures to recall Walker. Anytime something didn't seem to match to them, like a driver's license address wasn't the same as a voter registration
mm-hmm.
address, they would flag it. So all of a sudden they said, okay, we now are calling into question hundreds of thousands of these petitions, so therefore the recall shouldn't be qualified.
Right.
And they make this announcement, And then, people start looking at some of this stuff, and, it just doesn't happen. So what ends up, another example, this guy, John Fund, he has this new book that's right out. He claims that Al Franken was reelected to, was elected to the Senate and won the recall because there were 1,500 felons voting illegally, and as a result, Obamacare passed because that was the 60th Senate vote.
So this is John. So John Fund, and the name of the book is called "Stealing Elections." The book he wrote, right? And
that was the first one. I'm not sure what the latest one is, but let me just explain how this happens so people can understand really what's going on here. So what happens is the Minnesota's largest county, Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is, the district attorney cannot ignore these allegations that there are 1,500 felons voting. So he investigates and finds there were only 36 or 38 cases where people could actually be prosecuted, not 1,500. Mm-hmm. And so then Fund is out there saying, well, and this is where it gets really dangerous.
I mean, how do they know, by the way, that 1,000 felon voted? I mean, did they interview the people? Excuse me, sorry, are you a felon? I mean, how do they know that? Right?
What they do is they take a look at, they try to get jury lists.
Oh.
They try to get driver's license lists. They try to get law enforcement lists from government, and they try to play investigative reporter. But they don't realize that all these different government databases are not designed for voter registration purposes. So, for example, let's say let's say your voter registration form isn't the same as a driver's license form or a jury pool address. It doesn't mean that you're not a legal voter. It just means maybe you moved. So, or maybe you were a felon, you had your rights restored, and they just didn't track it. So the thing is, it gets investigated, and only 36 cases are able to be filed. Okay, so now what John Fund is out there saying, and he's not saying, by the way, this is the half truth. He's not saying that out of 1,500 cases, only 38 of them were prosecuted. He's saying that the laws aren't good enough, and therefore we need to take justice and the laws into our own hands. And to put in the sort of Christian spin on it, he says we're not supposed to allow the other side to bear false witness. I mean, it's decent, and it's and he's getting these people who are like these Tea Party types who know nothing about elections, all riled up. They know nothing about election administration, the details of what it is to register, what it is to vote, how votes are counted, how they're, you go from unofficial totals to official totals, and all that stuff. So what's happening is, you've got this sort of growing campaign to demonize the process and also to attack its credibility. And if you don't if you don't get the results you want from election officials, you start attacking them and attacking the courts as not being strong enough, or sufficiently.
So they made up this false fact that there were hundreds of thousands of aggressive, phony felons trying to basically elect this Democrat, right? They make it
15. So here's the thing: 2008 and 2009, they make that claim. They make that claim. 2009, after that recount, they try to dig in and do their so-called investigative report. And that's 2000, and 9. 2010, the Tea Party takes, they sort of, help with the midterm sweep. Now 2 years later, with a lot of money coming in, you've got these same organizations trying to train people to police, to be polling place observers. And this is completely analogous to when the Christian Coalition in the late 80s tried to elect a lot of people to local school boards.
When you say a lot of money coming in, from where?
Well, from Texas. There are a lot of very wealthy Texans, whether they're in oil or energy or others. Texas it's one of the biggest states. It's one of the wealthiest states, and it's all very.
So basically what you're looking at here is that you said it in the beginning of when you were talking is, and if you just tuned in, you're listening to Steven Rosenfeld, who is a writer, author, a journalist, and he writes frequently for Alternate. He's a fellow at Alternate. And basically what you're looking at is something that you called it, or you called it out earlier. It's basically a kind of a racism thing here. I mean, you're trying to get a whole lot of, the people who are doing this are basically white, Christian, and fundamentalist, and they see that if everybody was able to vote fairly like this or vote at all. They think they're felons. But if all these people were allowed to vote, they would suddenly lose the America as they know it. And they're sort of right.
Yeah.
They would.
Yeah, the thing is, you're right, they would. It's not all white people. There are some, unfortunately, there are some black Republicans and some African Americans also. But this is where it gets, quite frankly, this is where it gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
The way they talk about race, this is really interesting and really important, is they want to believe, like everybody wants to believe, that we are, they want to believe we're in a post-racial society, that race doesn't matter in America anymore.
Who wants to believe this? Who wants to believe this?
The Republicans, some of the people who are like the proponents of all these laws, and they're saying that they're not racist. They're saying that race doesn't matter anymore. That we are in a post-racial America, and we just want to have and then they go further and they say the people that are hurt the most by all this electoral fraud are like the poor because they're not well served by their school boards, which means like yes, it might be well served if they had charter schools and on and on and on and on. But the thing is, you get this whole notion that it's like where they then attack the Democrats for being really patronizing. You're patronizing the poor. You're patronizing people of color. Why can't people just stand up for themselves and do what the rest of us have to do? And blah 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 blah. No affirmative action in elections. And it would be great if we were like in a race, blind or racially, free society. But
when they say this, they're either deluded or they're lying. It's not true. It's just not true.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, we live in this society where the echo chambers, on wherever you are on the political spectrum, it's like the bubbles are not burst by anyone on the outside. So you get, but anyway, the point with all this is that the way that this is working out is that they're trying to determine who gets to vote, who's on the playing field. How can we tilt the rules to benefit our side? And, and they say that Democrats are naive because they want everybody to vote, there's no fraud, there's no mistakes. The liberals and progressives I know don't say there are no mistakes, they just say they're not rampant. And they say there are things about the system that are broken that the rest of you guys don't even want to talk about.
Yeah, but also it's the deliberate fraud has been proven by everybody to be statistically completely irrelevant and hardly exists on a larger scale.
Actually, we should be really clear about this. Because this is where, again, it gets very interesting. Now, there was just this study that was done by this group. I think it was called, I'm forgetting, like News 21 or something. It was a bunch of students. It was published in the Washington Post. It's on the Pew's website. It was out of the University of Arizona Journalism School. They did this extensive research into where were the cases of election fraud and where did they occur. And what they found, now this is really where it gets really interesting here, is the incidence of in-person polling place fraud, which is somebody pretending they're somebody else, because you have to sign in with a name and all this sort of stuff. They said, it was next to nothing, but what they said was, they then compared it to the number of people fraudulently filling out absentee ballots or voting by mail. And it was the rate of voting by mail fraud is like 40 times higher than what it is in the polling places. Now, politically, the significance of this is that the Republicans, they turn to absentee ballots for their get-out-the-vote efforts, whereas the Democrats tend to do more in-person polling place voting and early voting. Because then the other thing is all the voter ID laws that are being and all the voter registration drive stuff, all aimed for people who are not voting by mail. You can't get an absentee ballot in a lot of states until you've cast your first vote at a polling place. So at the same time, the Justice Department is coming in, Obama's campaign is coming in, and they're winning in Ohio. I mean, they reversed this. They extended early voting. If it doesn't get reversed to the weekend before the election, that's 100,000 people more that will be able to do it. They ended this crazy law where if you turn in a provisional ballot at the wrong table in a voting location, because different tables are numbered for different precincts, it doesn't count. That's another 40,000 votes. That were disqualified. The last federal cycle. So, but the thing is, the same time this is all happening, what does the Ohio Secretary of State do? He mails out absentee ballot applications to everybody in the state. so they're gonna, they're. It's like that, they're trying. It's so transparent, but they're trying
Yes.
to sort of, enhance the rules that help their get out the vote plans, and create barriers for the Democrats.
Well, so far it seems to be, unless the Justice Department is doing something about it, and then you got the Brennan Center and the ACLU and a few other places. They were successful. I mean, clear as far as I'm concerned, from what I've heard from various people and what I've studied, they did steal the 2004 election. And, if it wasn't Catherine Harris and Jeb Bush conspiring to defraud people out of being able to vote down in Florida, then Gore would have won too. So they stole 2 elections, and they're looking to steal another one here. And the reasons for that is obvious. One of them, I think, is a kind of cultural racist thing. They don't want the country to turn into what it's turning into, which is a country which is not the old white fundamentalist, middle-class Christian country that it was. The other thing is that they're doing, whether they know it or not, they are working as the creatures of very, very rich, very right-wing people who are manipulating all this. Rove, the Koch brothers, and all the rest of them.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely the truth. I mean, the model legislation that was passed for voter ID and some of these other restrictions came through ALEC, which is, American Legislative Exchange Council. It's got giant corporate sponsors. Different groups like Color of Change have been having a very successful campaign to get different companies. It's all like consumer boycott type stuff, to drop their corporate sponsorship.
Right.
They're being successful. Several dozen companies already. All that is happening, and so all that is happening.
Yeah. So this stuff that we're all finding out here, the only thing I see that's encouraging is that with this manipulation of laws and this intrusion on the voting places and everything, is that the Justice Department has finally, after a long nap, because they could have done this for years already, they've awakened, and they've had a lot of success in the last week or two alone in various states, but so far not in Pennsylvania, as far as I could see.
Well, Pennsylvania is going to be really strange. I mean, just to show you how transparent it is.
Yeah.
A suit led by the ACLU of Pennsylvania. With they have this 93-year-old, elderly woman who had her purse stolen, couldn't get the documents, couldn't get the state ID card. The day after an appeals court basically upholds the authority of the legislature to do this, the state decides to march her down to the DMV and present her with a card, which would deprive the the people who are suing, like the ACLU of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it takes away their cause of a suit. Right.
Their lead plaintiff.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more harm anymore, and it just shows you how arbitrary these and how venal this stuff is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what they say, they don't even. The state couldn't even say clearly, while they were during that trial, how many people were going to be affected. Mm-hmm. One day it was 600,000. One day it was 800,000.
But a place like that could actually swing the entire election, and so basically you have a federal court judge who let the thing go through.
Well, the thing that worries me about Pennsylvania is not just that. It's which is true. There are 11 million voters there. They said up to 9% might not have these IDs. Most of them concentrated in. That's
a lot of votes.
In Philadelphia area.
Right.
But the thing about it is, Pennsylvania is one of those states where more than 3/4 of the state votes on paperless, DREs,
mm-hmm.
no paper trail voting machines.
Oh boy!
So it's just that doesn't necessarily, generate much confidence either, because if there is going to be there's no possibility for a recount,
mm-hmm.
and and these are the kinds of things that both sides, quite frankly, ought to be concerned about, but they don't really talk about.
Well. We can only hope for the best. I mean, I am encouraged by these federal court decisions. I mean, what else could they decide? It's so clear, as you point out. It's just that clear. So we've been talking with Stephen Rosenfeld, and he is a senior fellow at Alternet.org. And people could just go to Alternet. And do you have a separate website or anything like that, or should
I don't have a separate one. But we have we post this stuff fairly regularly. Sometimes it's daily blogs under what we call Hot News and Views. Other times it's on the politics page.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when this election is over, there's going to be the need for everyone to step back and say, we need new federal voting rights legislation that clearly establishes the right to vote. And reaffirms that your eligibility is not determined by the kind of plastic you're holding in your wallet, but by whether you're a citizen, a resident, your age, your mental. This is what's established law.
Well, that's what we need. But here's the terrible irony: is we may actually wind up, because of this theft and because of this criminal behavior and this kind of vote treachery, we may wind up with a government that has no use for these things at all.
Well, the only thing I can say is this: these tactics. In 2000, we were shocked. After Ohio,
right.
In 2004, we were shocked again. Now it's 2012, and you know what? These tactics are not that new. They're not that hard to figure out how to get around them. And I think we can, I just think that's the message we got to really get out. It's be prepared and don't let the bullies win.
Okay. That is the message. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciated talking to you.
Sure. Stephen Rosenfeld, and check him out on Alternet. He's a good writer, and he really did go undercover at this place, which is sometimes amusing in a sort of a sad way. At this convention where they were teaching people how to find out where the awful felons were and stop them from voting. Okay, we're going to take a break now, and then we'll come back, and we're going to take your calls on everything we've been talking about. Voter suppression. Maybe if it's happening in your state, if it's happened to you, if you know about it, you can call. Number here is 866-997-4748. We've had a lot of calls in the last hour and a half, which we did not take because we were trying to get this information from our guests. So right after the break is your chance to call up, 866-997-4748. And if you want, you can go right ahead and talk about the convention. I mean, God knows there was plenty to talk about, and there's plenty that I had to talk about, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. So we'll take a break and come back. All right, back. Sirius XM Left 127. This is Mike Fader. I'm here every Saturday. If you're a new listener, I'm here every Saturday from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You want to get in touch with me or give me some information of any sort, you go to Fader Files. It's FEDER, FILES.com. You can get in touch with me that way, join my mailing list. And also check out, after we just saw Paul Ryan look at us straight into the camera with his very sincere choir boy, psychopathic blue eyes, and say everything out of his mouth was a lie. So we just had that. You might want to see my my thing I did on YouTube called New Republican Prayer, the New Republican Prayer. And it's just put in my name, Mike Fader, and New Republican Prayer. And it's a little thing I produced with a listener who lives out in Colorado. Actually, he lives out west. I'm not going to give the exact definition. It was I don't want to locate him for anybody. Could be one of those states out near Colorado. And it's about Paul Ryan, and it's about the Christian fundamentalists and God bless America. So it's called the New Republican Prayer. All right, so we just saw the convention. We saw everybody get up there. We saw a giant Mount Everest of elephant shit that was piled into the camera. It was, and then we saw Clint Eastwood, which is an aberration of striking proportions. And we saw Ryan. We saw Mrs. Romney, who was desperately, talk about desperate housewives, she was desperately trying to get Mitt, her husband, to seem like he wasn't an android or a robot built by Bain Capital to take over the United States. I don't think it really worked, but she gave it a good shot. And you know that she understands the regular common person. And you know how you know that? Because she sometimes used to eat, a long time ago, she used to eat tuna fish and pasta. That's what she had to eat. I mean, I heard that I felt so bad for them that they had to do that. Funny thing was, I had that the other day, but I know that she understands what it's like to be a regular person, because when she was very, very young, she at least once, maybe a couple of times, had to have tuna and pasta. She knows how you feel, And then there's this whole "we built it" bullshit, which is they took something that the president said out of context, although he shouldn't have said it that way. I look at the whole remark that Obama made when he was out there talking about business and how the business, the Republicans claim that it's just business that created America, as if the government never had anything to do with the highways and the public education system and defending our freedom by using an army or using taxes to save the country or anything like that, right? No, doesn't make any difference. Laws, highways, stimulus money, Social Security, the Army, nothing, doesn't mean anything. It's all business that built the country. There wouldn't be any country, there wouldn't be any freedom without business. Well, of course, we all understand that if business had their way completely, there would be no freedom whatsoever. You would just have to look at the Koch brothers and other people to understand that. But this we built it shit, it's just totally insane. For instance, it doesn't make any difference, of course, because they lie all the time, and that doesn't make any difference because Americans don't care whether they get lied to anymore. We are finally and totally fatally poisoned by our amusements, by video games, by TV and everything else. Lying doesn't mean anything anymore. They don't care. They lie. So what? The Nazis figured out it was a great idea, and it worked for them. It's working for the Republicans, and it's going to work for the Democrats, too. Finally, they'll get around to it. But this whole thing about we built it, they're saying this in this gigantic, in the Tampa Bay Times Forum, this huge stadium, which is used generally for ice hockey and a few other sporting events and concerts. In this Tampa Bay Times Forum, they're talking about we built it, and they have the words all over the place, and they're saying it from the podium, we built it. In fact, 60% of the money that went to build the Tampa Bay Times Forum is public money. The land on which the stadium is built, the convention hall is built, is government land. It's the Tampa Bay Sports Authority. And the streets leading up to the convention that the conventioneers use to get there are built by government money. They're just totally either crazy or they're lying. But what's new? And does it really matter anymore? Okay, let's take some calls. Matt from Michigan, you're on.
Yeah, hi, Mike. You got
Hi.
to listen to Ann Rodney carefully. She wasn't talking about canned tuna. She was talking about sashimi.
No. She can't tuna and pasta, which is what I had the other day. It was so good, I can't tell you. Anyhow.
I go for the canned salmon. It's better for your health.
You know, you're right. I should.
I used to fish for tuna, but I wouldn't recommend people eating it. What I wanted to say, though, I consider, I think, like you, Barack Obama to be essentially a war criminal. I'm not going to vote for him. I'm going to vote for Jill Stein.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you vote for a candidate, you're essentially endorsing their actions.
I'm with you on that, yeah.
But having said that, shouldn't you and I be encouraged that there still is apparently enough differences between the parties that the Republicans are willing to go to these just horrendous efforts to suppress the vote, which is essentially a type of coup. You can't win on your ideas, but to maintain power, you're going to manipulate the system, and so far they haven't actually used outright violence for the most part, but I think that's the next step. But you're going to manipulate the system because you can't convince most people to vote to support your ideas. So
you're absolutely right. You've defined the whole thing in a nutshell. And what makes them such hypocrites is, and typically they forget about the fact that Clint Eastwood is an old guy who wandered all over the place and went off message and was embarrassing. But the reason they put him up there was because he's Dirty Harry, because he's a vigilante, because he takes the law into his own hands, right? So, and the other thing is he's the macho man, or, now look at him now. It's unfortunate they could have found somebody else. But he's the macho. Used to have Charlton Heston, but he shuffled off the coil. He's the macho man, right? He's the tough guy. And yet Republicans are actually, as you point out, the real cowards here, because in a fair fight, they can't win. So what they do is they rig the game, either through banks or through voting suppression, and they corrupt officials. So they're the real cowards. They're not the macho guys,
Well, yeah, beyond that, I mean, you see in reality at this point, so many of the Republicans are actual cowards. They're all draft dodgers or people that got out of Vietnam or whatnot. I mean, there's hardly one of them that has done military duty or whatnot, and yet they're able to portray themselves as a tough guy. And just imagine, Mitt Romney's a real tough guy. Let's say that was a Democratic candidate. You wouldn't hear the end of, what a wuss he is and how effeminate he is and how spoiled he is and everything like that. But, through propaganda and whatnot, they're just able to portray this phony, tough guy image.
Business is big. Yeah, go ahead.
But don't you think that we should be actually encouraged by the efforts they're trying to make in a perverse way?
I have to say that I came away from this with the same feeling. I am not knocked off my balance enough to go ahead and still vote for Obama, because I still have my objections to him and I can't bring myself to vote for him. However, it was more clear, than it ever had been before, since I saw it with my own eyes and I heard it, right? How different the two parties really are still. The money behind the two parties, who really manipulates things like the White House and everything else, and people who sponsor congressmen and who buy senators, it's still basically the same kinds of people. But there really is a difference between the two parties. For instance, as was pointed out by one of the observers to the convention, they have their diversity. They have about 2 or 3 rows in the very front where the camera sees them all the time. And you remember that the Republican National Committee, along with the Secret Service, runs the camera. Anything you see, any camera shot you see there of the convention is not from the networks. It's a pool camera run by the Republicans. So what they did was constantly show you the handful or the 30 or 40 black and Latino and and Asian people, and maybe a few old Jews who have Alzheimer's, who wandered in and think it was a pro-Israel rally. They have them all in the front row, and then if you look towards the back, everything beyond the first 2 rows is a mass, a sea of white Christian people, right? And in the front row, they salt it completely. It's like they completely salt it like a con game with their diversity people, right? So it's just a mass of lies. Essentially, they want everything to be business. They want laws to be abolished. They want business to run everything, and they want to do away with the EPA, the Department of Education, and everything else. I guess you're right. I guess there really is a serious difference still, at least in philosophy, between the two parties. So you're right.
Well, I hope so. I hope this isn't just essentially we come to the point where it's just a battle between this corporate interest versus that corporate interest. And that's what democracy is now in this country, just a battle between corporations.
Yeah,
I really, now I'll ask one thing, I'll let you get to the next caller, but I really wish that I could have asked Greg Palast directly if at this stage in our history, is there any real difference or is there any more democracy in this country than the so-called enemy countries like Iran or Russia or Venezuela, for example? Or are we just as much oligarchic at this point? I'd like to get his opinion on that.
Well, I think, I know him for a long time. He and I go back like decades, actually. And I don't think he would say that we've reached that point yet. In a place like that, I wouldn't be on the radio. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be on the radio.
Well, that's where you continually hear about the journalists getting shot in Russia, so we're not quite to that point yet.
No, it's not. It's really not that bad. But the trouble is that there is a road. It's a very clear road on a map. If you look at a map of history and a map of politics, there's a clear road on every one of them, whichever map you look at any time and place. And it leads straight to fascism, this road, all the time. We're right on that road, and we're marching down it at a faster pace all the time. So we're not there yet. No, I couldn't broadcast in countries like that, or I'd be shot down in the street in countries like that. There would be no voting. They would just cease it. They would shut down the internet. They would shut down cell phone use. So no, we're not like that yet. And obviously, it was made clear to me, and I have to admit this, that those two parties really do have some differences between them. These people are really crazy. They're dangerous, bigoted, racist, nutty, anti-female people, and they're worse than the Democrats. I have to admit it. We're going to move on. Take another call. We did take a break, right? Okay, Jim from Detroit, you're on.
It's actually Tim from Detroit.
Oh, Tim, I'm sorry.
Just so much to say on this topic and so little time. If you really want to keep following the election fraud issue, there's a guy called Brad Friedman. You might have heard of him. He has this website called Brad Blog.
Oh, sure.
He's been documenting election fraud for, at least I've been following him for about 10 years.
Yeah, I know his stuff, yeah.
And good stuff. The thing is about election fraud, okay, we know in this country it's been done, by the Republicans in this era. It's been done, obviously, and Greg Palast really pointed this out very well. He's written so many books about it, and you brought him on today. It's been done by the Karl Rove machine. People have come out from even his organization have admitted it. There was an assistant of his. She actually came out around 2004 and said how they were actually rigging the votes from Chattanooga, Tennessee. They actually would hack right into these machines, these voting machines. Many states now have these e-machines. So a voter, there's no paper trail. You go in, you vote on the e-machine. That thing gets lost somewhere, and it can be totally hacked. And that's the thing with these e-machines. There is no way to stop them from being hacked. So as a result, they can peel off pretty much any number of votes they want. And this has been going on at least since the 2000 election.
And these the companies that make these machines have direct and very serious ties to Republican candidates.
Yeah, Diebold, of course, is sort of the archetype of all these. Because in fact, Kenneth Blackwell in Ohio in 2004 bragged that he was going to hand the election over to Bush. Kenneth Blackwell being the Secretary of State of Ohio.
Yeah, and he did, and he went ahead and did it.
Yeah, he did. So this has been going on. And the thing is, I wanted to criticize a little bit Rosenfeld. I mean, he did a very good job in documenting this, but he confused the terms election fraud with voter fraud. Now, voter fraud is the myth that the Republicans put out there that somehow there are all these, Democrats out there illegally voting, writing Mickey Mouse on their ballots and all that. And,
which doesn't exist. Yeah, it's not true.
Remember like how they took down Acorn. They claimed Acorn was committing all this voter fraud, which it never was. In fact, there were even Democrats like that woman in California. I'm trying to remember her name now. Oh God!
It doesn't matter because we haven't. Go ahead.
So Acorn was basically brought down by a lot of this garbage. And the thing is that what really has been going on in this country is something called election fraud, where the voter is themselves. They're ripped off. In other words, you go and vote for whoever you want, and they're gonna tilt it over to the Republicans.
Yeah, the real fraud is from the Republican Party and from politicians and from local and state and even federal politicians and from people like Karl Rove. That's where the fraud is. Those are the people who should be locked up and serving a life sentence in jail for undermining democracy. I got to take one more call. Okay. Thanks, Jim. Let's go to Jay in Illinois.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, how you doing?
That's good. I always hear this voter fraud argument, and I think you're missing a basic argument you can make with the other side, which is our country is always based on the premise that you're guilty until proven innocent.
You're saying? Are you being ironic? Or
I'm being facetious.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So you're innocent until proven guilty. All of these voter laws that they're putting in place are based on the premise that you're guilty. You must be a voter fraud, and you have to prove you're not. This
makes perfect sense because 95% of the people who were involved in persecuting and prosecuting this alleged or imagined voter fraud are people who are also steeped in Christianity, where everybody's guilty and we're all going to hell.
Yes, that's exactly right. And then to me, it's a basic argument that you need to appeal to the other side, saying, look, our whole system of government is based on the fact that I'd rather let 10 men go free that are guilty than put one man in jail who's innocent.
That's right. Absolutely right. Thank you. Let's go to Larry in Ohio. Larry, hi. I can only give you about 2 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. Well, there's so many things that could hit. So we'll start with we built it. I'm a businessman and I'm a conservative. And let me just say that I like you only because you admit your leanings. You are a socialist or a communist, okay? You've said it before.
Yeah, I mean, I said it and I mean it. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. That's good. I totally disagree with it. The we built this thing was so offensive about that. Businessmen like me and like the Republicans do not say, except for the total nutballs, the Ron Paulites, that no government is, should be involved. We all know that we have to have a certain amount of government. What we're saying is that as a businessman, most of us risk everything to be in business. And the government didn't put us in business. Government didn't help us. In fact, in a lot of cases, it hinders us. Now, the roads you're talking about are paid by us.
Taxes. Taxes, right.
Right. The taxes are paid by the top people that create jobs.
But wait. Most of the now here we could get into a long conversation. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. But most of the major corporations in this country are delinquent to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in their taxes. So that's one thing. Now, if you're talking about small businesses, I guess we're not going to have a conversation. You go ahead, make a speech.
No. I agree with what you're saying. I know what you're going to say about that. Most corporations we have the highest tax rate in the world. But the problem is it's phony because most corporations find loopholes to not pay anything like GDP.
Well, actually, let me, I'm sorry, I hate to do this, but we don't have the highest tax rate in the world. Most European countries have a much higher corporate tax rate. But go ahead.
Okay, well, that's not true, but that's beside the point. The thing is that what Ryan wants to do and what Romney wants to do is eliminate the corporate loopholes and level the playing field. Just have a real, doesn't matter what the actual tax rate is as long as we get more revenues in, doesn't it? So what if the tax rate is 20% and we're actually getting 20% instead of 40%, or I'm just throwing that number out, and getting 10%? It just matters how much revenues you bring in. So if you lower it, get rid of all the things that favor certain industries, it levels the playing field for all of us.
Okay, you done?
Well, I could go on for hours.
I know you could, but the thing is, I think, and we could go on for.
The government's not going to be there if my business fails. We take huge risks, and what he was saying, it was not taken out of context. What he was talking about was collectivism, and everybody chips in, and all this other stuff. And
absolutely right.
You didn't build it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. In fact, for instance, like if you have a business or anybody has a small business, and we only have about a minute here to discuss this, unfortunately, but we're going to move on. Maybe we could talk about this later on after our other guest comes in at 7:00. What he was basically what he was trying to say was that, for instance, you couldn't have a small business in this country without people who are employees, and your employees would be unemployable, and they couldn't work in your business unless they were educated in public schools.
Look, let me tell you something. It's only a crazy person is going to say that the government has no role.
Right.
I'm not saying that, and the Republicans and the businessmen are not saying that.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
No, they're not, because
That's what Ryan is saying. That's what Ryan is saying.
A lot of taxes, and I don't mind it as long as it's being paid.
Oh, please! Do you really believe that Ryan and Romney would close loopholes? He shook hands with Charles Koch at the convention.
Romney, listen, you have to understand Romney. Whether you like him or not, he's a guy who gave up as a total inheritance. He's a guy who does not need to work. He doesn't need any more money. For whatever he wants to, he believes he wants to serve. He's not a guy that, when you talk about billionaires,
wait, I got to stop you because we're right at the end of the hour. But you go ahead.
Call back? I'll call back.
Call back after around 7:30, and we can take this up again. Okay, thanks a lot. All right, so stay tuned. This is Mike Fader on SiriusXM Left 127. We will be back after the 7:00 news to talk to Leah Bolger, who is the head of National President of Veterans for Peace. And we're going to talk about something interesting that happened with NBC and a TV show they put on, which only lasted about 4 weeks at the most. And something interesting about that to talk about. And then we'll go on and talk more about the convention afterwards. And this is Mike Fader on SiriusXM Left 127. We are going to take some calls later on after we talk to our next guest. For those people who are talking about the convention and want to mention more things about what they thought about the convention, probably around 7:30 we'll do that, maybe a little earlier. Who we have on now is Leah Bolger, who is the National President of Veterans for Peace. She spent 20 years on active duty in the U.S. Navy and retired in 2000 at the rank of commander. And she is currently a full-time peace activist, and again, as I mentioned, serves as the National President of Veterans for Peace. And there's a couple of reasons I had you on tonight. One is we are going to talk about this program that NBC put on a new, what they call reality show, which has the opposite to do with reality, called Stars Earn Stripes. And this was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now I find out just today that they are canceling the show, but maybe you could explain to me a little bit about what that show was.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, I just found out yesterday, too, that they're canceling it, which is wonderful news, and hopefully they got the message from people that this was the wrong way to go, that war is not entertainment. But briefly, to describe what this show is about is... NBC has 8 what they call celebrities. Some of these people are famous for being married to famous people, like Todd Palin. Mm-hmm. He's one of the celebrities. Layla Ali, Peekaboo Street, Dean Cain, who played Superman. The host of The Biggest Loser, I don't even remember his name, but there are 8 people who are the stars. A host
of really great Americans. But
yes.
Go ahead. Yes.
Right. And these 8 celebrities are paired up with 8 special forces on the show. They call them operatives. And there's SEALs and Delta Force and SWAT team commanders and that kind of thing. And then what's especially appalling is that the host of the show is retired General Wesley Clark, who saw combat, should understand that war is not a game played by contestants.
Was Wesley Clark in Vietnam?
Yes, I believe he was in Vietnam, but he was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and then he ran for president. So he's got to be aware of. I can look him up in Wikipedia, but yes, I believe he was in Vietnam, and he saw a combat. It's just appalling to me that he would reduce this to entertainment, and so the whole thing. You used the word reality show in quotation marks. There's nothing realistic about this at all. They have these contrived scenarios that are missions, and Wesley Clark describes their mission to go out and blow up this arms cache and then jump on a helicopter and it's just these very contrived action movie type scenarios.
Well,
and
I didn't. Did you see a show? Did you see an actual show?
I wasn't planning to watch it because I was so just disgusted by the trailers. So when you asked me to be on your radio show to talk about it, I thought, well, I've got to watch this thing so I can speak responsibly. And I have watched all 3 of the episodes, and they're just appalling. I mean, really, really awful. Words fail me.
Well, yeah. Well, words can't fail me because I get paid for it. But basically, and now you did something I didn't do. I mean, I saw trailers for it, and I read descriptions of it, and I even went to NBC's website and read all about it. However, I couldn't bring myself to watch them. So I'm glad you did watch them. Did the stars, quote unquote, did they wear uniforms of any sort?
Oh yes, they wear camouflage gear just like the real professionals do, and if they complete their mission successfully, they earn a stripe. And for each stripe, they get to donate $10,000 to a charity of their choice.
That was one of the hooks was.
Yes.
You should explain that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so each celebrity picks a different charity, and they're all somehow related to the military. One of them is the Wounded Warriors Project. One of them is about YMCA in Alaska. I think that was Todd Palin's choice. Mm-hmm. And they're and so NBC can I just write all this off as a charitable contribution as well, that they're earning money for our heroes and their heroes' families, and it's just crap. I mean, it's really, really awful.
The people they were paired up with, were they actually serving members of the armed forces?
I think some of them were still in active duty. Some of them were retired. I know there was one a young fellow. He was a HM3, that's a E4 in the Navy, and he was a corpsman, a SEAL corpsman, and I thought he was still in active duty. Some of them are older guys that are retired, but yeah.
Some of them. People who are in active duty in the armed forces are allowed to be on TV shows? I don't really understand how that works. I mean, that's part of their assignment then? In other words, they get, what...
Well, I don't know this to be true. So I don't know for sure that they were on active duty, but obviously this show had the full cooperation of the military in making it. I mean, because it just glorifies the military and war and weapons, and they can't say enough good things about our military. So, this was done, like I said, who knows how many of our tax dollars were spent making this television show.
True, that is true.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, and I'd also like to point out the connection between NBC, the company who has this show, is owned by General Electric, which also owns several arms manufacturer companies. Mm-hmm. So it's combining, making the military-industrial complex into the military-industrial media entertainment complex, and it all feeds on each other. So it's just there's so many conflicts of interest there, and then Well, I just
I know I feel the same way about it. It's so horrible, but it is a terrible spiraling kind of interface, like you pointed out. You get a company like GE, who, by the way, hasn't paid you last year and I last year paid more in taxes than GE did.
Right.
But so GE is making billions and billions of dollars, a lot of it on selling weapons to the rest of the world. By the way, there was an article in the paper just about 4 or 5 days ago that the United States is now selling close to 70% of the weapons in the world, especially to armed conflicts in third world countries. 70% of the weapons in the world are sold by the United States now. It's never been that high before. GE produces a lot of this. They own NBC, so it's in their, as you point out, it's in their business interest to glorify war. There is nothing more disgusting or sickening than this. And, to have Wesley Clark in here, I don't really understand. I mean, you don't know what anybody's motivation is. You know what's in somebody's heart, right? Obviously, the man needed money, I guess. I mean, certainly he's doomed from now on for any kind of public appearance or public office.
Well, yeah, you're probably right about public office, but, he'll still, I bet you he'll be on TV shows as pundits, and just like you see Barry Caffrey on television shows all the time. He's on news, purportedly news shows. It's supposed to be the military pundit that knows a lot about military stuff, but he's on the board of directors for DynCorp. So he's selling military every way he can. So I don't know if Wesley Clark's reputation has been damaged all that much, depending on what he wants to do with his life. It is really sad to me that he would participate in something like this. Somebody who should be exposing the truth of war and not glamorizing it and making it into some kind of big game show.
It's not a new thing in America, but it certainly is. It's far more ramped up than it ever was. That sports competitions and national televised sports competitions have a very intricate relationship with our wars overseas in the military. I mean, not to mix too many things, but after 9/11, you hardly ever see, certainly in New York City, you're going to see, the seventh inning stretch at Yankee Stadium. You see 4,000 flags and everybody stands up and they salute and sometimes occasionally a jet will fly over. I mean, to mix in the two things. And at many major sports competitions, there's now a flag that's 100 feet by 50 feet. There's there are people, in the military in bands or who do singing. It's getting closer and closer here,
I remark on that all the time about how, if I remember growing up and seeing, movies or newsreel kind of things about the Soviets having, big military parades and people, rolling tanks down the street and showing off their military might and thinking, oh my gosh, that's horrible, and we used to criticize that kind of bravado but the United States is so much leaning that way than they used to be, and everything. If you wear a uniform, you're a hero automatically. There are no questions about what you did in that uniform or what your life is like since you wore that uniform. There's no questioning about it. It's just this blinders on, jingoism of our country. We're number one. We're the best, and conflating patriotism and military and sports. You're right. For some crazy reason, sports has gotten involved in this too.
Well, I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense in some ways. I mean, sports has always been very often like a very violent competition. One team against another one. There's sort of war, with each other. Sudden death. All the terms, that kind of blitz. There's a blitz in football. Do they know what that actually means?
Well, there's a shotgun formation. And
that's how it worked. But I don't want to get into a whole other conversation. But truly, it is a very masculine kind of situation in certain ways.
Sure. Yeah. But and other things that are more subtle though about this linking patriotism to sports. It didn't used to be that uniforms, college basketball team uniforms, didn't used to have flags, American flags on them. But now they all do. And it's like, if a team is playing another country, then I could see, well, yeah, okay,
Right.
wear their country's flag. But now we've got our own teams playing each other, and everybody, has to outdo each other with how patriotic they are and how many flags they got on their apparel.
There's a lot of flags around, and most of them are, this is not a joke, most of the flags in the United States are made in China.
I know.
So it's good. So our patriotism is at least good for Chinese business. Let me move on. So this thing, thank God, or somebody, or whoever, or actually organizations like yours and Roots Action and other organizations and people like David Swanson helped to take this thing down. I think the other thing that happened to this show was it just probably got bad ratings.
Well, yes, it did. It got very bad ratings. And what I think is very interesting is that right-wing people and left-wing people think the show was terrible.
Good.
I followed some conservative blogs to see what they were saying about it, and they thought it was terrible. And so, NBC I don't think they canceled it because of pressure. I think, it's all about money, and they got really poor ratings, and so, they're cutting their losses. I'm glad it's canceled, but, this is just a tiny little, victory for our side. It doesn't really diminish any of the underlying problems that brought this thing to be a TV show in the first place.
Yeah, and it's only the first shot in a long series of entertainment. I mean, after all, if we're headed this way, the Romans finally did perfect that, where they had people actually killing each other, in the Colosseum. So we're not too far away from that. We'll broadcast it to make them sign insurance, forms so that their families will get money. Let's move on to something else here. There's a press release I got from Veterans for Peace, and which you are the national president of, and it says, why Veterans for Peace will protest the RNC and the DNC. Now, we just looked at the Republican National Convention, which is clearly the hawk convention. Let's bomb Iran. Let's do, it's all about the defense budget. It's about war. It's about standing up for American, blah, 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 blah. And it's a very warlike, dangerous group of people there. But you're protesting both conventions. And let me just read something from your press release, and then I can ask you. Is that
okay?
Okay. We also need to help the public abandon the pretense that one of the parties is already peaceful. President Obama, in the past 3.5 years, has escalated war in Afghanistan and continued it in the face of overwhelming public opposition. He's invented a new kind of war using drones and launched such wars in numerous nations, building intense hostility towards the United States. He keeps a list of nominees for murder. On the list are adults and children, Americans and non-Americans. He holds meetings with his staff on Tuesdays to decide whom to kill next, and then he kills them. And I could go on. So this press release is, we see a very warlike, straight-ahead, let's bomb them all party. Is the Democratic Party less warlike than the Republican Party?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I think Obama has proven that as soon as he took office. He asked for $116 billion to a emergency war funding supplemental to continue for Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
He's quadrupled the number of troops in Afghanistan since he's been there, and all the things that you just read. Talking about Iran, he says no option is off the table. He's been very bellicose about we will not allow Iran to do this or do that. I think and what's even more like salt in the wound, I guess, is that Obama, who denounced the war in Iraq, refuses to prosecute anybody in the Bush administration for the war crimes that were conducted in that war. And just today, I read about now Holder is not going to prosecute CIA agents who tortured people to death. Which is the
last stop on a train. I mean, that means that they'll never go after anybody who did any of those things. So,
that's right.
Is it obvious to you as it is to me that that's because he's running for election and has to look like he's a man of sterling masculine qualities, and he has to defend the United States against all of its vicious enemies? I mean, he's running for election, right?
Right. Well, and sadly, I think that's what it all boils down to. That he wants to be reelected, and our system is so convoluted and broken with the way money pressures people into doing things to appease the moneyed interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what his motivations are, but he had opportunity to do the right thing when he was elected. And I think people really delude themselves if they think that Obama is a peace president or, defense spending. Oh, and I should use defense in quotation marks, too. I like
it's more war.
Military spending.
Yeah.
War spending, military spending has gone up and up and up while Obama's been our president. And, I can't in any measure say that the Democrats are more peaceful. And so Veterans for Peace, we don't support or oppose any party or any candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do support are issues, and what we do oppose are bad positions and policies. And both parties are responsible for very bad positions on war and military.
Well, at least didn't Obama say, though, initially, although he seems to be backing off this because he's running for election now, that he preferred negotiating or speaking with Iran, right? And he was condemned for that.
Well, he says negotiate and diplomacy. That he prefers that, but he hasn't done any of that.
Mm-hmm.
We have not engaged in dialogue with the Iranians, but for a couple hours in the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we have done is impose economic sanctions, which are an act of war. And sanctions are not diplomacy. The sanctions violate the Geneva Conventions because they're collective punishment that are hurting a group of innocent people, the Iranian people, and they have done nothing wrong. They have violated no laws, and so for him to say he prefers diplomacy is just hot air.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't tried diplomacy, and what's more, and what really is appalling to me is that Iran has not done anything that they need to negotiate from. They have not done anything wrong. They have not violated international law.
Well, but theoretically speaking, on the basis of pure reality, I'm just, saying, like, so devil's advocate here, they are actually clearly, it seems to me, proceeding with developing what might be atomic weapons. And with the kind of declarations that some of the people in charge there have made about various other countries or other countries and the way they've funded various other groups out there, and then you can have a whole discussion about this, they can be a pretty bellicose country, and they've shown that. And people are saying, well, they're going straight ahead and developing these things, could be nuclear weapons. Aside from the fact that they're not violating anything, I mean, there's no law against developing nuclear energy or nuclear weapons, but it's just sort of an informal law set by the countries that do own these things. People are saying, well, if they get away with this, then there's a great danger to the world. How do you respond to that? Did we lose that call? Yeah. Oh, can you dial her up again? Okay. Meanwhile, we're going to talk to Leah Bolger, who's National Veterans, the president of National Veterans for Peace, and you can. She'll tell you the place to go to check on what their group does. There's one or two questions I want to ask her. Starting after 7:30, when we have our break, our commercial break, we are going to then take calls again about the Republican convention and some of the speeches we saw and what you thought about them. There have been people who've been calling up while I've been talking just now. And do we have Leah back? Hi. Somehow lost contact.
Well, I'm afraid it was my fault. It was my iPhone, and that I accidentally touched something I shouldn't have touched.
Well, you got to be careful. That's a smartphone. People aren't as smart as they're.
Smart. But I really wanted to address the comments you just made about Iran being bellicose and all that. What is more bellicose than the United States saying no option is off the table and Iran is part of an axis of evil?
Mm-hmm.
The United States and Israel have been just as bellicose as any other nation, and what's more, we have actually used nuclear weapons against another country. Now, what the big elephant in the room that nobody talks about is that Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. Ready to launch, and they are not even signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Mm-hmm.
So they have never allowed the IAEA into their country to inspect their program because they don't even admit it exists. Now, Iran, on the other hand, signed on to the NPT the day it was open for signature in 1968. And they have let inspectors into their country to look at their nuclear program. They have said they are not developing a nuclear weapon, and all the intelligence reports, American intelligence reports, say that they are not developing a nuclear weapon. The inspectors say they're not developing a nuclear weapon. So, why is it that we are so silent about Israel?
Mm-hmm.
And then also you've got India and Pakistan also in the region surrounding Iran, and they are also not signatories to the NPT. So, let's, instead of pointing fingers at Iran and punishing the people of Iran for some, bellicose or inflammatory language that one of their leaders made, why don't we start looking at the real actions of countries that are in violation of international law, like the United States and Israel?
We could also throw into this mix that you're talking about here the fact that we have close to 40 bases, some secret and some not secret, surrounding Iran.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nuclear weapon equipped ships.
Mm-hmm.
We have dozens of American ships within firing range of Iran as well. So Iran is calling for a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. And the best way for the United States to keep Iran from having nuclear weapons would be to move our own weapons out of their area and to put pressure on Israel to become transparent about their own program, to put pressure on India and Pakistan to sign the NPT and to follow the NPT. Mm-hmm. And that would be the most peaceful path that we could follow, and the most pragmatic as well.
You're listening to Leah Bolger, Bolger, and she is the president of national president of Veterans for Peace. I'm going to ask you one last question, but maybe you could tell people where they would go to online to get information about your organization.
Oh, thank you for asking. It's
sure.
veteransforpeace.org. Veterans for Peace, all one word, .org.
Okay. One last question. Let's say we elected a president. It's certainly not going to be one of these two presidents, but maybe it might be if there's enough pressure brought. You never know. But let's say we elected a president and they said, okay, this war in Afghanistan was, wrong maybe the day after or even the day before we even started it. We're going to bring troops home from all over the place instead of sending more troops out to more bases like we're doing now, like, the Marines who just went to Australia. Let's say we bring home several 100,000 American sailors, airmen, Marines, soldiers, Army troops. If we bring all these people home, what becomes of them? There's no jobs here.
Well, if we invested a fraction of what we're spending on the military on jobs programs, we could find jobs for them. We could put people to work building green energy, refurbishing our decaying infrastructure, educating people, doing research. I mean, there's that is, I think, a red herring to say, well, we can't bring them home because then they'd be unemployed.
Right.
I don't buy that argument at all.
Mm-hmm. It's just one you hear all the time, which is why I'm bringing it up.
Right.
We'd have this massive influx of people and wouldn't be able to have jobs. But thank God, at least we have a choice now, because if we elect Romney and Ryan, they will create jobs and everybody will be happy. So Leah Bolger, who is you should go and check out Leah Bolger's website, she's national president of Veterans for Peace. Check out the Veterans for Peace website. Leah has had some interesting adventures as an activist in the last couple of years, including actually being arrested, which makes you into a terrorist now, I guess, right?
Yes, I'm sure I am enlisted as some kind of enemy combatant. Yes, I'm sure I'm on some list.
Well, you did walk into the House of Representatives, wasn't it? Or was it the Senate?
The most recent arrest I think you're referring to was I interrupted the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, aka the Super Committee, which had House and Senate members from both parties on it, and basically, I just told them that the way that you need to end the deficit, and they were supposed to find $1.3 trillion. And I said it's very easy. It's a two-step program. You need to tax the rich and end the wars.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it it was an effective action. I just walked up to the front of the well of the Senate hearing room, and I spoke for almost a minute before I was arrested. And it was on C-SPAN, and it's been played over and over again. But I think it was effective action because I didn't look like a crazy woman. I just walked up to the front and then spoke. But I think it resonates with people because that's what they say. What I said really did represent the 99% of American public who see the answer so clearly. Tax the rich, end the wars, and we could have everything we wanted. We could have, we could provide jobs and housing, and nobody would go to bed hungry at night. We could fix all the bridges. We could have everything we wanted. We could have universal health care. But we throw our money into the military machine,
and we don't tax the rich. And we don't tax the rich.
No, we don't. We don't.
Well, there it is. I mean, that's as simple as that. Some people say, oh, that's so simple. That's naive. That's childish. But it is as simple as you just said, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
All right. Leah Bolger, and National President of Veterans for Peace, thank you very much for doing what you're doing and for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. Call anytime.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Mike Fader here. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we can talk some more about the Republican Circus Convention Coliseum event that occurred down in Tampa, Florida. Okay, let's take a break, Mr. Engineer. Okay, we're back. Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127. Republican Convention. I have a friend who's on the radio in Houston, and KPFT, part of the Pacifica Foundation series of a chain of radio stations. His name is Scooter, and you can catch him. You can catch him on the radio. Last name is spelled Skutre. But he was down there interviewing somebody at the Tampa Convention, and I thought I'd bring you that interview right here.
Reporting from the Republican National Convention in sunny Tampa, Florida, with me is Thelma Kractard, delegate from Wisconsin. Hello, Thelma.
Hello.
Thelma, tell our listeners, what are you doing here?
I'm here to represent the World Christ Church. I never thought I'd vote for a Mormon, but I'll take a Mormon over a Democrat.
So you're not happy with the president?
Obama works with the madrasa. He wants to bankrupt our country's nation with Medicare and give our liberty. Just give it away to the United Nations. He risked the lives of Navy SEALs, and now the SEALs are leaking. He's not an American. Even if he was, Hawaii's not part of America. Have you ever been there? Obama is like all socialists and fascists and everything, and gays and abortion and birth control. And he's Iran is threatening the marriage, and they're stealing babies and the Mexican anchor babies. Oh, and the FEMA camps, they've got the death camps. They've got the trailers in people's yards. They've got trailers, and they're full of vaccines to poison our children. Every child in the United States.
And you're hoping to bring
about...
And
they're going to take away our guns and give them to the Palestinians. And they fly those planes above my house with their chemtrails. And their radar beams can see right inside our house. And those radar beams are unconstitutional because the Founding Fathers and the Bible. And that's why he's just got to go, because we don't need another 4 years with a Democrat in the White House.
We've been speaking with Thelma Kractard at the Republican.
Oh, hold on. Look, wait. I have these pamphlets here from the Wisconsin Patriots about welfare in Chicago, and that's Obama's plan.
Thank you, Thelma.
Wait. I haven't even told you about how the government is using aborted fetuses for mind control experiments.
And we'll get back to you on that.
Hold on, come back here. Do you know how high our national debt is?
And back to our live coverage.
Come back here.
Hello.
You better practice your Chinese, mister.
Help me out on this.
Come back here, you piece of shit.
We now take you back to our live coverage, and I am Stone White.
Okay, an interview with a typical Republican conventioneer. You heard it with your own ears. So I watched the Republican convention. It's a bunch of liars, hypocrites, and cowards. It's just absolutely astounding. And, of course, they don't care if they lie anymore. It doesn't make any difference at all. To me, basically, they just look like a bunch of doddering, overfed, fat, pale, sex-starved, repressed homosexual, nascent serial killer, frigid, deluded, terrified, enraged, racist greedheads. That's what they look like to me. But on the other hand, I could be overdoing my reaction to them. I noticed one guy, my favorite guy that I saw at the Republican convention, who seemed perfectly typical to me, was a big, fat, sweaty white guy with a straw, with his own, white guy with a straw hat, and he had a big, long elephant penis nose. He had an elephant nose, which looked like a giant gray penis on top of his own nose, and it was erect and was flopping around in the air. He had elephant ears with Romney buttons pinned to him. See, this is a typical convention year, right? And we're paying for this, by the way. Your tax dollars pay 1/3 of these convention expenses in a convention hall, not built by business people, but actually built by the city of Tampa and by state and some federal government loans, and on public land. Talk about we built it, right? So this fat guy with the elephant penis nose and the elephant ears is down there, and he's sweating. He's half alcoholic, he's half drunk. He's probably down there, like half the time getting drunk, and he's hanging out with some pole dancing stripper while his wife is home eating chocolate fudge cake or something. So there's the Republicans. How different will it be at the Democratic convention? I don't know. We'll talk about that the weekend after this. We'll talk about that next Saturday. But it's the hypocrisy and the lying that bothers me in this particular case, right? You get a guy like Chris Christie, the Republican Party attack dog. And first of all, you get a guy like Paul Ryan talking about how the government needs to stay out of basically everything. And this is Paul Ryan's point of view. They have to stop bothering. The government has to stop interfering with anything, especially with business. Of course, business is, God-ordained business to be the most important thing in the world. Like business is, what did I hear somebody else, like Al Sharpton said on TV the other day, like as if the government didn't make them, business was going to tax itself and give money to people who needed it in the country, who were disabled or poor or old. That's why in the Depression and in the 1930s, they had to pass federal government laws rescuing people who are old and sick and unemployed, and create things like unemployment insurance and Social Security, and later on Medicare and everything else like that was created because business did have control of the whole country since the beginning, and especially from the 1890s straight up to the Great Depression, which was presided over by Hoover and the Republican Party, the party of business. If business is allowed to go unchecked, and that is to say big business, and I'm not talking about people who own a store or have a tractor dealership or built up an ice cream parlor. There's a million small businesses that everybody understands are people who work themselves to death building up, and they deserve credit for it, and they do hire employees. In fact, last I heard was that the greater number of employees are working for small businesses in the aggregate than work for whole corporations if you add them all up. And the large corporations are the ones who run everything, though. The small business people are getting just as screwed as middle-class people who are teachers, who are nurses, who are, 55 other professions, truck drivers, people who aren't, their own small business owners, have their own business. Basically, this whole I built it thing is bullshit. Paul Ryan, who's very into, we built it, I built it, whatever it is, that guy's been sucking off the government, some part of the government body. He's been sucking off the government almost his entire adult life. This guy has been a congressman. Before that, he was working for politicians like Jack Kemp. Since he's gotten out of college, maybe 1 or 2 years, he did something else. His whole adult life he's been supported by the government. He gets government health insurance. He gets like $156,000 a year. He gets travel expenses. He gets health insurance that's better than 90% of the health insurance all of you get. And it's on your taxes. Your taxes help pay for this convention. Chris Christie was, the U.S. attorney in New Jersey, the lead U.S. attorney in New Jersey, and now he's the governor of New Jersey. He gets paid something like $175,000. He got $140,000 as the U.S. attorney. He was consistently cited by the Justice Department in an internal report as being one of the worst violators of the travel expenses and the extra expenses for all U.S. attorneys, right? And he has used his role as the U.S. attorney in postponing indictments and postponing cases that were brought directly against his own relatives and his own business associates, or people he knew as business associates or his relatives' business associates, to keep them from being locked up, or to allow them to sell their business interests and to make money before they were indicted and arrested. He's a criminal, and he's been living off the government. This fat son of a bitch pig has been living off the government for most of his adult life too. So it's such utter hypocrisy that it's beyond really description. And then you got Clint Eastwood, who truly is, despite the fact that they didn't know he was going to wander off script and be so doddering and nutty, he truly is a symbol of what the Republicans want to believe they are. Instead of being fat, cowardly, sexually repressed, bigoted, racist, sexist assholes that they really are, basically they think of themselves as tough, settlers who are going out west and braving the wilderness, and the savages, they have to circle the wagons against the savages. The savages are the Republicans. They are the savages. Democracy has to circle the wagons for being killed by the savages who are the Republican Party. That's the way it goes. Now, having had my say, you can have your say. The number here is, we had our break, right? Okay, so we did have a break. Oh, so everybody who calls up now, we can talk straight till the end of the hour. 866-997-4748. If there's no calls, I obviously am a person who has a lot to say. I can fill up the time, but here's your chance, 866-997-4748. You saw the convention. Is there anything to add about this? I mean, I think hypocrisy would be the main word I would use. Hypocrisy. That would be the word to use. And what if they get in power? Now, I guess one thing that impressed people was, and this is what they wanted, this is the message they wanted to deliver at the convention, and I think they did deliver this, that Obama is, in his own way, insensitive sometimes, and he is clearly has contempt for a lot of other people. It's hard for him to not be contemptuous of other people. I mean, he can wave his hand and smile, and he's very charming and he's charismatic, but he often does seem to have contempt for a lot of different kinds of people because he's an intellectual and he thinks he's better than other people. It's true. And that's unfortunate about him. So that's President Obama. Also, I think he's in over his head. I think he hasn't done a very good job as being president. I think he could have been more aggressive in pursuing the people who really did wreck the economy, i.e. bankers. But what he did was he allowed some of the people who really are the basically the little poodles of bankers and people who let the bankers get away with murder, Summers and Geithner, be his two main political advisors and as Secretary of the Treasury. So Obama is in hock to the bankers. He's a war-mongering murderer, and he's also a bad manager. And Romney did project, despite the fact that it's Bain Capital, and we're going to have somebody on next week, by the way, who's an expert on Bain Capital, where they got their money from. Are they job creators or are they job destroyers? We'll have somebody, it's easy to use those words, but we're going to have somebody on next week who's an expert in this, and we're going to talk about this. So, but what we did see, I think, was somebody who, despite the fact that he put, a lot of people out of jobs and caused a lot of misery for people, and maybe he started Bain Capital with some very suspect money, he did manage the Olympics. He's a manager. And he may actually, and as a governor of Massachusetts, although they don't like to talk about that too much because he was very sort of a liberal governor of Massachusetts, that Obamacare, which he wants to eliminate in his insanity, is based directly on what was called Romney Care in Massachusetts. The same man, the architect, the inventor of the plan, they interviewed the guy, right? He's the main consultant for the plan in Massachusetts that Romney set up, is the man that Obama and his colleagues consulted to set up what's called Obamacare. So here's this guy who was a good manager, who could be a good manager, who might be a good manager. He may even be, to his friends and family, a decent man. I mean, fuck the people who got put out of, the thousands of people lost their jobs because of Bain Capital. He shipped them over to China. But it sounds like he could be a decent man. Sounds like he's a good administrator. He's a good manager. Who is not a good manager and a good administrator is obviously Barack Obama. So this could be his weak point. As far as job creations, it's utter bullshit with the Republicans. But Obama hasn't done such a good job either. Okay, let's go to Evan in Long Island. You there, Evan?
Yeah, can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Clint Eastwood and this stupid thing the Republicans have been doing with the invisible chair with Obama.
Well, he what I hear is he made that up himself. They didn't know he was going to do that.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I heard it was ad-libbed. But MSNBC had a good discussion about this morning. They were talking about how he was there's kind of this underlying image where he's talking down to the chair as though he's talking down to the president. And another thing was that Clint Eastwood also exposed his flabby penis.
Excuse me? Oh, did you cut him off? Did you cut his penis off? No? But he's gone, and that's not such a bad thing. Yeah, he cut himself off. Ugh, disgusting thought. Ken from Wichita, you're on.
Well, I'm just a little curious. You're complaining that these people have been in office.
Mm-hmm.
How do you change things if you don't get in office? I mean, if you really want to change things,
business. You create jobs by being in business.
But if you want to change the laws, if you want to change the direction the country's going in, if you want to change how big government is, you have to somebody has to become the servant that does that.
I'm just pointing out that it seems hypocritical, if not absurd, to me, to hear people like Paul Ryan and Chris Christie attacking the government, providing service and help and money for people all over the place, like lying in hammocks and sucking off welfare, when they have been living very richly off the government for dozens and dozens of years. It seems strange to me.
There's a little bit of difference about being on welfare and doing a job and getting paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you agree?
I guess so, if there's a work welfare program. But meanwhile, these guys have been supported royally, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't make much money, by the federal government, and they want to cut down the federal government's money. They've been living off the federal government.
Well, I think Chris Christie could have probably went to the private sector and got paid a lot more money than he could as governor once he's finished being the Attorney General of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's true.
That would not been a problem.
I don't think he's going much further than governor, though, because as far as I'm concerned, that speech made him sound kind of like a bully.
And as good as Ryan is with the economy and numbers, and he could definitely go to the private sector and do much better than he's getting paid. I don't know about
that. I mean, I think his reputation for being some kind of intellectual economic genius is overblown.
Well, I don't think. Well, it may, if it's overblown, then we have a lot of idiots in government because nobody else is coming up with anything.
Well,
came up with something.
Yeah, I guess so. Anything else you want to add? Because I do want to take one or two other calls.
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Dave from Pittsburgh, you're on. Not there? Okay, Bob from Indiana, you're on.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Go ahead, you're on the air.
I'm a small business owner, and I've never called into any of these shows.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to call in so your viewers that don't own a business can kind of get insight into what's going on, and so maybe they can understand a little bit better.
Well, what kind of business do you have?
I own a trucking business, and it's a C Corp. And
what does that mean, C Corp?
Well, that's a good question, and there's a lot of people that don't understand that when you open a business, you're either a sole proprietorship, an LLC, or a C Corp, or an S Corp, which is something along the line.
So you're a C Corp, and a C Corp is what?
Well, what it does is it separates entities. It's actually another entity other than yourself, and it keeps your taxes separate from each other.
All right.
That's one way to think about it.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, I voted for the president the last time he ran. I am thoroughly satisfied with how he's doing, unlike a lot of people that I've been listening to. And I think we need to keep in mind that we were losing 850,000 jobs a month. I listen to Wall Street every single day, and I can assure you that this president is done and doing all he can do. And something I would like to point out, Mitt Romney, the last time he ran for the primaries and lost, I heard him say out of his own mouth, and I wish somebody would dig up a clip and talk about this, because the Republican Party is not the Republican Party anymore. It's changed. And that's why it's lost my vote, number one. But at any rate, Mitt Romney said that if he gets elected, he's going to completely eliminate Social Security, and that it's a waste of taxpayer money. Well, people who make over $1 million don't even pay into the fund. So I don't know where he's getting this waste of taxpayer money. But what I'd like to contrast his idea against is what Dwight Eisenhower thought, and they contributed to a lot of socialist programs. And the way I feel about it, if you're not very social, then you're just not a very good person to hang around with. You know, it isn't the Republican Party anymore. It's the corporate capitalist party. They want to capitalize the entire world through the big corporations that don't pay what they should in taxes. And
I read. Sorry to interrupt you. I read something the other day that somebody calculated, and they actually used figures, from various different places. That if everybody who is really wealthy and every corporation paid their back taxes and their current taxes, it would wipe out the deficit.
Well, there's problems with that, though, and yes, that may be true. But the problem is that there's a lot of business owners that are flat struggling. When the fuel prices first went up during the George Bush administration, they jumped huge out here, and people were going broke left and right. And so there's a lot of people that aren't in a position to be able to pay their back taxes. Now, there's other alternatives. Maybe we need to consider settling debts with people that owe back.
Well, I didn't really mean people like you or people like me. I meant people like, people who make billions of dollars a year. And look, Mitt Romney, for something like Mitt Romney, who paid 13 or 15% of his taxes. Somebody like GE, who made billions of dollars in profit and paid no taxes. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, Mitt Romney made $23.5 million last year, and he pays less in taxes because of the way he has his investment structured. In other words, instead of making a capital gains, he's getting a dividend, and so you're taxed less on a dividend than you are a capital gain. There's loopholes in the system, but let me say why I'm against the flat tax system. The flat tax system is we need to discern the illusion that the Republicans want us to believe, and that is that the flat tax system is going to benefit everybody. Well, let me say, it won't benefit everybody, and all it's going to do, they're going to broaden the base, and they're going to put more burden on the poor people in this country. And, I'll say something. We should have elected a black president 100 years ago because, as far as I'm concerned, our president he is extremely focused for people that are in well, for one, I guess if you could say if we even have a middle class anymore, but he is extremely focused on people that are in the real world that don't make multiple millions a year and that are struggling to feed their families.
I have to tell you that we're almost exactly out of time here, so you got like a couple of seconds left if you wanted to make a last point.
Okay, what I would like to say is that we're in a struggling economy right now, and he's made the president has made some extremely tough calls, and one of those calls is what to do with the military budget. I was floored the first time I realized.
You're not really. I mean, I really mean that we're out of time. So thanks for calling, Bob from Indiana, and call again sometime when we have more time. It's unfortunate we're just right at the end of the program. Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with somebody who's an expert on Goldman Sachs. He knows